A prince's desperate whisper echoes in a palace under siege. Jewels worth a kingdom vanish into a schoolgirl's tennis racket. Who is the shadowy figure watching from the balcony, their eyes glinting with betrayal? As a coup ignites the desert, a pilot risks everything to protect a secret that could topple empires. Will the jewels reach safety, or will the mysterious cat claim them first? In 30 seconds, a world of intrigue unfolds, where trust is a lie, and danger hides in plain sight. Chapter 1. Shadows over Ramatha. Sun hung low over Ramatha, a molten disk bleeding crimson across the desert horizon. Its light poured through the arched windows of the royal palace, casting jagged shadows on the marble floors. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and the faint, acrid taints of unrest. Prince Ali Yusuf, young and burdened beyond his years, paced the grand council chamber, his silk robes whispering against the polished stone. His dark eyes, sharp with worry, darted to the heavy doors, half expecting them to burst open with news. Betrayal. "It's coming, Bob," he said, his voice low, almost lost in the hum of the ceiling fans. "The vultures are circling. I can feel their eyes on me." Bob Rawlinson, the prince's trusted pilot and closest confidant, leaned against a carved pillar, his weathered face unreadable. A former RAF man, Bob had seen enough of the world's chaos to know when a storm was brewing. He adjusted his cap, the only remnant of his military days, and gave a curt nod. "You're not wrong, Ollie. The streets are buzzing. Your generals are too quiet, and that's never a good sign." The prince stopped pacing, his hands clenching into fists. "My father built this nation on trust, Bob. Trust in the people, in the council, in me. But now—" He trailed off, glancing at the balcony overlooking the city. Ramat's skyline shimmered in the heat, its minarets piercing the haze. But the distant chants of protesters were growing louder. They want the throne. They want the jewels. They want everything. Bob pushed off the pillar, his boots clicking on the floor. As he approached, "Then we move fast. Get you out. Get the jewels out. Somewhere safe until the dust settles." Ali's gaze hardened. "The jewels. They're not just wealth, Bob. They're the heart of Ramat, my family's legacy, if they fall into the wrong hands." He didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. The jewels, diamonds, emeralds, rubies, each the size of a quail's egg, were worth millions. But their true value lay in what they symbolized: power, unbroken lineage, the right to rule. In the wrong hands, they could fund a coup, arm a rebellion, or worse. Bob's voice dropped to a whisper. "Where are they now?" Ollie hesitated, his eyes flicking to the balcony. A figure stood there, half hidden in the shadow of a jasmine trellis. A servant, perhaps, or something more sinister. The prince lowered his voice, barely moving his lips. "Hidden somewhere no one would think to look." Bob followed his gaze, his jaw tightening. "You sure about that?" Ali nodded, a bead of sweat tracing his temple. "Jennifer's racket. The handle's hollowed out. She's leaving for England tomorrow. Meadowbank School." No one will suspect a schoolgirl. Bob's eyebrows shot up, but he didn't argue. It was bold, reckless even, but that was Ali's way trusting the unexpected, hiding treasure in plain sight. Right, Bob said, scratching his stubbled chin. I'll fly her out myself. Get her to London, then come back for you. No, Ali said sharply. You stay with her. If I fall, you make sure those jewels don't. Promise me, Bob. Bob met his friend's gaze, the weight of the moment settling between them. I promise. The palace was a labyrinth of secret, its corridors alive with whispers. As night fell, the air grew heavy, the stars obscured by a veil of dust blown in from the desert. Ali sat alone in his private study, a small room tucked behind the throne room, its walls lined with ancient texts and maps of Ramat's borders. A single lamp cast a golden glow over his desk, where a letter lay half-written, its ink still wet. To my dearest niece, Jennifer. He paused, his pen hovering. Jennifer Sutcliffe, his cousin's daughter, was only 15, a spirited girl with a love for tennis and a stubborn streak that reminded him of himself. She knew nothing of the jewels hidden in her racket, nothing of the danger that followed them. Ali's chest tightened at the thought. He was sending her into the world with a fortune in her hands, a target on her back. A soft knock broke his thoughts. Enter, he called, his voice steady despite the unease curling in his gut. The door creaked open, revealing Hamad, the palace steward. His gaunt face was pale, his eyes darting nervously. Your Highness, a message from General Casa. He requests your presence at the eastern gate, urgently. Ollie's pulse quickened. Casa was one of the few he still trusted, but urgency at this hour could mean only one thing. Did he say why? Hamed shook his head, his fingers twisting the hem of his robe. No, sire, only that it concerns the safety of the palace. Ollie stood, smoothing his robes. Very well, tell him I'm coming. As Hamed bowed and retreated, Ollie's gaze fell on the balcony again. The figure was gone, but the jasmine vines swayed slightly, as if disturbed by a passing shadow. He grabbed his dagger from the desk drawer, slipping it into his belt. Trust was a luxury he could no longer afford. The eastern gate was a fortress within a fortress, its iron doors flanked by guards in crimson turbans. General Casa stood waiting, his broad frame silhouetted against the torchlight. His face, usually stern, was etched with something Ollie hadn't seen before. Fear, Your Highness, Casa said, his voice low. We've intercepted a courier. He was carrying this. He held out a folded parchment, its wax seal broken, but bearing the insignia of the northern tribes' rebels who had sworn allegiance to Ali's rival, Sheikh Osman. Ali unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning the scrawled words. A map, hastily drawn, marked the palace's weak points: the western aqueduct, the servants' tunnels, the armory. Below it, a single line: the cat watches, strike at dawn. The cat, Ollie murmured, his mind racing. A code name, perhaps, for a spy within the palace. Someone close, someone who knew his movements, his plans. He glanced at Casa. Who else has seen this? No one, Casa said. I brought it straight to you. But, sire, we must act. The tribes are massing beyond the city. If they breach the walls, they won't. Ali cut in, his voice firm. Double the guard. Seal the tunnels. Unfind this cat. I want every servant, every advisor questioned. Kassar nodded, but his eyes betrayed doubt. And you, sire, you should leave. Tonight. Ali's jaw tightened. I won't abandon my people. Not yet. As Kassar barked orders to the guards, Ali's thoughts turned to Jennifer. She was his last hope, a pawn in a game she didn't know she was playing. He had to get her out before dawn, before the cat's claws struck Dot in the pre-dawn haze. Ramet's airport was a hive of activity, its tarmac shimmering under the floodlights. Bob Rawlinson guided Jennifer through the chaos, her tennis racket slung over her shoulder, her eyes wide with excitement rather than fear. She was a tall girl, her blonde hair tied back in a messy ponytail, her school uniform slightly rumpled from the long journey. Uncle Bob, why's everyone so tense? She asked, dodging a porter lugging a crate of fruit. It's just a plain ride. Bob forced a grin, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Just politics, kid. Nothing for you to worry about. You're off to Meadowbank, best school in England. Focus on your tennis. Yeah, Jennifer rolled her eyes. You sound like Mum, always fussing. They reached the small plane Bob had prepped, its propellers already spinning. Ollie stood by the steps, his face half hidden by a hooded cloak. He pulled Jennifer into a quick embrace, his voice low. Be good, Jenny. Keep that racket close. It's special. She frowned, sensing the weight in his words. Special how? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You'll see one day. Just trust me. As Jennifer climbed aboard, Bob lingered, his hand gripping Ollie's. I'll keep her safe, he whispered. You get out, Ollie. Don't wait. Ollie nodded, but his eyes were on the horizon, where the first streaks of dawn painted the sky. Go, Bob, now. The plane's engines roared, drowning out the distant rumble of tanks. As it lifted off, Ali watched it climb, a speck against the rising sun. He turned back to the palace, his heart heavy. The cat was still out there, watching, waiting, and dawn was breaking. The coup came faster than Ollie expected. By mid-morning, the palace was under siege, its walls trembling under artillery fire. Ali fought alongside his guards, his dagger flashing in the chaos. But the rebels were relentless. General Kassar fell in the courtyard, his blood staining the marble. Hamd the steward vanished in the smoke, his loyalty now a question mark. In a desperate bid, Ollie slipped through a hidden passage, emerging in the desert beyond the city. Bob was waiting, as promised, in a battered jeep. Told you I'd come back, Bob said, his face grim. Get in. They sped toward a private airstrip, the palace burning behind them. But the rebels were prepared. A black car roared from beside road, its windows glinting with rifle barrels. Bob swerved, cursing, as bullets tore through the jeep's frame. "Hold on," he shouted, flooring the gas. The plane was in sight, its engines warming, but the car was gaining. Ollie clutched the seat, his mind racing. The jewels were safe with Jennifer, but the cat, whoever they were, knew they had two. The airstrip was a blur of sand and heat. Bob skidded to a stop, shoving Ollie toward the plane. "Go. I'll hold them off." "No," Ollie protested. But Bob was already drawing his pistol, his face set. "For Rammet," he said, and fired at the approaching car. The plane's door slammed shut, the engines screaming. Ali strapped in, his heart pounding as the aircraft lurched upward. Below, he saw Bob fall, a dark shape crumpling in the sand. The black car exploded in a fireball, but it was too late. The plane shuddered, a wing sparking as bullets found their mark. The last thing Ollie saw was the desert rushing up to meet him, the jewel's secret buried in a schoolgirl's luggage, and the cat's shadow stretching long across Rammet in England. Meadowbank School for Girls stood serene under a grey sky, its ivy-clad walls a world away from Ramot's chaos. Jennifer Sutcliffe stepped off the train, her tennis racket bouncing against her back. She was unaware of the fortune hidden in its handle, unaware of the eyes that had followed her from the palace balcony to the London platform. A woman in a grey coat watched from the station bench, her face obscured by a newspaper. Her fingers traced the edge of a photographer's snapshot of Ramot's palace, torn at the corner, with a single word scrawled in red. Cat. As Jennifer joined the stream of girls heading to Meadowbank, the woman folded the paper and stood, her lips curling, into a smile. The game had begun, and the jewels were in play. Chapter 2. The gates of Meadowbank. Late April sun hung low over the rolling hills of Devon, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of Meadowbank School for Girls. The air buzzed with anticipation, a symphony of chatter and laughter, rising from the gravel drive where polished cars disgorged their cargoes of students, parents, and trunks. Meadowbank, with its ivy-clad brick and gleaming white porticos, stood as a monument to English tradition, its gates flung wide to welcome the summer term. Yet beneath the surface of this orderly chaos, secrets stirred, as elusive and dangerous as the breeze that rustled the ancient oaks lining the avenue. Miss Aneria Bulstrode, headmistress, stood at the top of the stone steps, her posture as unyielding as the oak-panelled walls behind her. At 52, she was a figure of quiet authority. Her grey hair swept into a neat chignon, her tweed suit tailored to suggest both elegance and discipline. Her sharp blue eyes scanned the arriving families, noting the anxious mothers, the distracted fathers, and the girls, some eager, some sulky clutching tennis rackets, lacrosse sticks, and dreams of summer glory. Meadowbank was her kingdom, and she ruled it with a blend of maternal warmth and steely resolve. But today a faint unease prickled at the edges of her composure, though she could not yet name its source. "Miss Bulstrode, the Sutcliffes are here," called Miss Chadwick, her deputy, hurrying across the drive. Chaddy, as the girls affectionately called her, was a wiry woman in her 60s, her face creased with decades of loyalty to Meadowbank. Her tweed skirt flapped as she gestured toward a sleek Bentley, from which emerged Jennifer Sutcliffe, a lanky 13-year-old with mousy hair and a preoccupied air. Beside her stood her mother, Mrs. Sutcliffe, a handsome woman in a silk scarf. Her smile strained as she surveyed the school. "Jennifer, darling, do try to stand up straight," Mrs. Sutcliffe murmured, adjusting her daughter's blazer. Jennifer shrugged, her gaze fixed on the tennis racket slung over her shoulder. It was an unremarkable racket, its grip worn, its strings slightly frayed, but she clutched it as though it were a talisman. Miss Bulstrode's eyes lingered on the girl for a moment, sensing something unspoken in her distracted demeanor, but she dismissed it as the usual nerves of a new term. Mrs. Sutcliffe. "A pleasure," Miss Bulstrode said, extending a hand. "Jennifer's settling in well, I trust." "Oh, she's thrilled to be back," Mrs. Sutcliffe replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Though I do worry about her cousins in Ramazz's dreadful unrest there. Have you heard? The prince was killed in that awful coup." Miss Bulstrode nodded, her expression neutral. News of Ramat's turmoil had reached even the insulated halls of Meadowbank. Prince Ali Yusuf's assassination and the subsequent chaos had dominated the papers, though the details remained murky. "A tragedy," she said, "but rest assured, Jennifer is safe here." As Mrs. Sutcliffe launched into a monologue about her daughter's tennis prospects, Miss Bulstrode's attention drifted to another Cara, modest Morris, minor pulling up at the gate. From it stepped Mrs. Upjohn, a wiry woman with a nonsense air, her auburn hair streaked with grey. Beside her was her daughter, Julia, a bright-eyed girl with a freckled nose and a grin that suggested mischief. Mrs. Upjohn's gaze swept the crowd, sharp and assessing, as though she were cataloguing every face. For a fleeting moment, her eyes locked on a figure near the stables, a tall man in groundskeeper's overalls, his face shadowed by a cap. Her lips parted, and a flicker of recognition crossed her face, gone as quickly as it came. "Mrs. Upjohn." Miss Chadwick bustled forward, breaking the moment. "Julia's grown since last term, hasn't she?" Mrs. Upjohn said, her voice brisk. "Though I dare say she's more interested in detective stories than her Latin verse." She gave her daughter a fond but exasperated look. Julia, clutching a dog-eared copy of The Hound of the Baskervilles, grinned unrepentantly. Miss Bulstrode approached, her curiosity piqued by Mrs. Upjohn's intensity. "Mrs. Upjohn, welcome back. I hear Julia's quite the reader." "Oh, she's incorrigible," Mrs. Upjohn said, but her tone was warm. "Mind you, she gets it from me. I was always buried in books during my younger days." She hesitated, as though choosing her words carefully, then added, "I trust Meadowbank's as secure as ever." The question, though casual, carried an edge. Miss Bulstrode's brow lifted slightly. "As secure as a fortress," she said. "Our grounds are well patrolled, and our staff vigilant." Mrs. Upjohn nodded, but her eyes strayed again to the groundskeeper, who was now hauling a sack of fertilizer toward the rose garden. Miss Bulstrode followed her gaze, noting the man's easy stride, the way he seemed to blend into the scenery. He was new, this Madam Goodman, hired on the recommendation of a trusted agency. Yet something in Mrs. Upjohn's scrutiny made her resolve to check his references again. As the morning wore on, the drive emptied, leaving only the girls and their trunks. Jennifer and Julia, assigned to the same dormitory, found themselves side by side in the oak-paneled hall, their footsteps echoing on the polished floor. The air smelled of beeswax and lavender, a comforting reminder of Meadowbank's timeless order. Yet Jennifer's fingers tightened around her tennis racket, her eyes darting to the shadows as though expecting something to leap out. "Nice racket," Julia said, breaking the silence. She plopped her suitcase on her bed, her Sherlock Holmes book tumbling out. "Do you play much?" Jennifer blinked, as though startled. "Oh yes, a bit. It's belonged to my cousin." Her voice faltered, and she busied herself unpacking her movements jerky. Julia tilted her head, sensing a story. "Your cousin, the one in Ramat?" Jennifer's hands froze, then resumed their task. "Yes, Bobby. He gave it to me before." She trailed off, her lips pressing into a thin line. Julia, ever curious, leaned forward. "Before what? Come on, you can't leave it there. Was he caught in that coup? Did he escape on a camel or something?" Jennifer's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. "No camels. He didn't make it. Plane crash." Her voice was flat, but her knuckles whitened on the racket's grip. "Oh, I'm sorry," Julia said, her mischief fading. "That's awful. Was he a pilot?" Jennifer nodded, her gaze distant. "He worked for Prince Ollie, flew his private plane. They were close, I think." Julia's eyes widened. "A prince's pilot? That's like something out of a book. Did he ever tell you any secrets, like about treasure or spies?" Jennifer's smile vanished. "Don't be silly," she snapped, turning away. "It's just a racket." Julia frowned, stung by the rebuff, but her curiosity only deepened. She glanced at the racket, noting its scuffed handle, the faint scratches on the wood. It looked ordinary, yet Jennifer guarded it like a relic. Tucking the observation away, she changed the subject. "Want to explore? I bet we can sneak into the sports pavilion before supper." Jennifer hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but don't tell anyone about Bob, okay?" "Cross my heart," Julia said, miming the gesture. "Come on, let's go." The sports pavilion, a low brick building at the edge of the playing fields, was Meadowbank's pride, housing trophies, equipment, and the dreams of athletic glory. As the sun dipped below the hills, casting the fields in amber, the two girls slipped through the side door, their giggles echoing in the cool, shadowed interior. Racks of lacrosse sticks lined the walls, their polished wood gleaming faintly. A glass case displayed silver cups, their inscriptions faded but proud. "It's creepin' here," Jennifer whispered, clutching her racket. "Why's it so dark?" "It's just the light," Julia said, though her own heart quickened. She flicked a switch, but the overhead bulbs only hummed faintly, casting a dim glow. "See, nothing spooky." They wandered deeper, passing stack of gym mats, and a pile of tennis balls. Julia, ever the detective, scanned the room, her imagination conjuring smugglers and secret passages. Jennifer trailed behind, her eyes darting to the windows, where the last rays of sunlight bled through the glass. Suddenly, a faint flicker caught Julia's light, not from the bulbs, but from the far corner, where a door led to the storage room. It pulsed once, twice, then vanished. She froze, grabbing Jennifer's arm. "Did you see that?" Jennifer's face paled. "See what?" "That light, over there." Julia pointed, her voice a hiss. "Someone's in here." Jennifer's grip on her racket tightened, her breaths shallow. "It's probably just a reflection, or the groundskeeper." Julia shook her head, her freckles standing out against her flushed cheeks. "No way. That was a flashlight. Come on, let's check it out." "Are you mad?" Jennifer hissed. "What if it's, I don't know, a thief? Then we'll catch them," Julia said, her eyes gleaming. "Think of Utus, solving a mystery on the first day." Jennifer looked torn, her fear warring with a spark of adventure in Julia's grin. Finally, she sighed. "Fine, but if we get caught, I'm blaming you." They crept toward the storage room, their sneakers silent on the wooden floor. The air grew musty, heavy with the scent of leather and dust. The door was ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning. Julia's heart pounded, her fingers brushing the handle. She pushed it open, the hinges creaking softly. Inside, the room was a maze, pile of crates and old equipment, their shapes looming in the gloom. No light flickered now, but the air felt charged, as though someone had just passed through. Julia squinted, her eyes adjusting, when a faint rustle came from behind a stack of hurdles. "Who's there?" she called, her voice bolder than she. Felt silence answered, thick and oppressive. Jennifer clutched her racket like a weapon, her breath hitching. Then, with a sudden clatter, a lacrosse stick toppled from a rack, crashing to the floor. Both girls screamed, stumbling backward. "It's just a stick," Julia gasped, her hand on her chest. "It must have been loose." Jennifer's eyes were wide, her voice trembling. "Let's get out of here, now." Julia hesitated, her curiosity battling her nerves. But Jennifer's fear was contagious. They fled the pavilion, the door slamming behind them, and raced across the fields to the main building. The twilight sky was bruised with purple, the first stars pricking through. Only when they reached the dormitory's warm glow did they stop, panting and laughing with relief. "That was brilliant," Julia said, her fear forgotten. "We're proper detectives now." Jennifer managed a shaky smile, but her eyes strayed to the pavilion, now a dark silhouette against the hill. "Maybe," she said softly, "but let's not do that again." As they climbed the stairs to their dorm, neither noticed the figure standing by the stables, watching them. Adam Goodman, the groundskeeper, leaned against the wall, his cap pulled low. In his hand was a small flashlight, its beam extinguished. His lips curved in a faint smile, but his eyes were sharp, fixed on the girl's retreating forms. Back in her office, Miss Bulstrode sat at her desk, a ledger open before her. The day's chaos had settled, but her unease lingered. She reached before the telephone, dialing the agency that had sent Adam Goodman. The line rang once, twice, then clicked to a recorded message. This number is no longer in service. Her fingers tightened on the receiver, her gaze drifting to the window. Poor. The pavilion's roof was just visible in the moonlight. For the first time in years, Meadowbank felt less like a fortress and more like a house of secrets. Its gates no longer enough to keep the shadows at bay. That the next morning the school buzzed with the rhythm of routine. Girls streamed into the dining hall, their voices a cheerful cacophony over plates of porridge and toast. Jennifer and Julia sat together, their adventure in the pavilion already fading into a thrilling anecdote. Yet Jennifer's eyes kept straying to her tennis racket, propped against her chair, as though it might vanish if she looked away. Across the room, Miss Springer, the game's mistress, barked orders at a group of dawdling third-formers. Her angular face and booming voice made her a figure of terror, though her passion for sport was undeniable. "Hurry up, girls. Lacrosse practice at 10 sharp, and I won't have any laggards." Julia nudged Jennifer. "She's worse than a drill sergeant. Bet she'd scare off any thief." Jennifer smiled faintly, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She remembered Bob's last letter, written weeks before his death, its pages filled with cryptic references to a game worth playing and a prize hidden in plain sight. She'd thought it was his usual teasing, but now, with the weight of the racket in her hands, she wondered if he'd meant something more. At the staff table, Miss Bulstrode sipped her tea, her eyes scanning the room. Beside her, Miss Chadwick fretted over the timetable, her pencil tapping nervously. "Honoria, do you think we should cancel evening practices? After that light in the pavilion, I mean." "Nonsense. Chatty," Miss Bulstrode said, though her tone lacked conviction. It was likely a faulty bulb. "I'll have Mr. Goodman check the wiring today." Miss Chadwick nodded, but her frown deepened. "I don't know, Anuria. There's something off this term. I can't put my finger on it." Miss Bulstrode set down her cup, her gaze lingering on Jennifer's table. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "but Meadowbank has weathered storms before. We'll keep our eyes open." As breakfast ended, the girls dispersed to their classes, their laughter echoing down the corridors. Julia, clutching her Latin textbook, whispered to Jennifer, "Let's keep an eye out for that light again. If it's a mystery, we're going to solve it." Jennifer hesitated, her fingers brushing the racket's grip. "Maybe," she said, her voice barely audible, "but some mysteries are better left alone." Outside, Adam Goodman swept the drive, his movements unhurried. The sun glinted off his cap, hiding his eyes, but his lips curved in that same faint smile. In his pocket, the flashlight lay heavy, its beam a secret only he knew. And somewhere, in the heart of Meadowbank, a tennis racket held a fortune, its truth waiting to unravel in the hands of two unsuspecting girls. Chapter 3. The first strike the night hung over Meadowbank School like a velvet shroud, heavy with the promise of secrets. The moon, a pale crescent, cast fleeting shadows across the manicured lawns, where the silhouettes of ancient oaks sway in a restless breeze. Inside the sports pavilion, a place of sweat and triumph during the day, the air was thick with an unnatural stillness. The faint creak of a floorboard broke the silence, followed by the sharp click of a flashlight beam slicing through the dark. Miss Eleanor Springer, the game's mistress, moved with the precision of a predator. Her wiry frame, clad in a practical woolen sweater and sturdy boots, betrayed no hesitation as she navigated the cluttered pavilion. Lacrosse sticks leaned haphazardly against the walls, their wooden handles gleaming faintly under her light. Her sharp eyes, accustomed to spotting a student's faltering sprint or a poorly aimed throw, scanned the room. She'd seen the flicker, bum of light from her dormitory window, an intruder, she was certain, and Eleanor Springer was not one to let such things slide. "Who's there?" she barked, her voice cutting through the quiet like a whip. No answer came, only the distant hoot of an owl beyond the pavilion's walls. Purr. Grip tightened on the flashlight, its metal casing cold against her calloused palm. She stepped forward, her boots scuffing against the polished floor, and swung the beam toward a row of lockers. A faint rustle, barely audible, made her pause. Her heart thudded, not with fear but with the thrill of confrontation. Eleanor Springer thrived on control, and this trespasser was about to learn that she moved toward the sound, her flashlight illuminating a pile of gym bags in the corner. "Come out now, or I'll drag you out myself," she snapped, her tone laced with the authority that made first-year students quiver. The rustle came again, closer now, and she lunged forward, yanking a canvas bag aside. Her beam caught a glint of metal and knife, she thought, for a fleeting second, before the world exploded in pain. A sharp crack echoed as a bullet tore through her chest, and Eleanor Springer crumpled to the floor, her flashlight rolling away, its light spinning wildly across the ceiling. The pavilion fell silent again, save for the faint drip of blood pooling beneath her. The intruder stepped forward, their shadow looming over the fallen mistress. A gloved hand retrieved the flashlight, clicked it off, and vanished into the night, leaving only the echo of their footsteps and the cold certainty of death. By morning, Meadowbank School was a hive of chaos. The sun, rising over the rolling hills of the English countryside, seemed to mock the grim discovery within the pavilion. A groundskeeper, arriving early to mow the fields, had found Miss Springer's body sprawled among the gym equipment, her eyes wide with shock, her sweater stained crimson. Word spread like wildfire, and by breakfast the dining hall buzzed with whispers, the clatter of cutlery replaced by gasps and stifled sobs. Miss Honoria Bulstrode, the headmistress, stood at the head of the hall, her imposing figure a beacon, bar of calm amid the storm. Her grey hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, surveyed the sea of anxious faces. The students, ranging from wide-eyed 11-year-olds to poised 17-year-olds, sat in uneasy silence, their usual chatter subdued. The staff, seated at the high table, mirrored the tension. Miss Chadwick, the school's co-founder, clutched her napkin with white knuckles, while Miss Rich, the literature teacher, stared blankly at her untouched toast. "Ladies," Miss Bulstrode began, her voice steady but carrying an edge of steel. "I understand this morning's news is distressing. Miss Springer was a valued member of our staff, and her loss is a tragedy. The police are on their way, and I expect your full cooperation. Meadowbank is a place of learning, not fear, and we will face this together." Her words, meant to reassure, hung heavy in the air. Jennifer Sutcliffe, seated near the back with her friend Julia Upjohn, leaned closer to whisper, "She's trying to keep us calm. But this is no accident, Julia. Someone shot her." Julia, her freckled face pale, nodded. "I saw Miss Springer last night, heading toward the pavilion. She looked angry, like she knew something was wrong." Jennifer's blue eyes narrowed. "You didn't tell anyone?" "Not yet," Julia murmured, glancing round. "But I'm going to. This is bigger than a prank gone wrong." Across the hall, Shasta, the princess from Ramat, sat apart from the others, her dark eyes fixed on her plate. Her silk scarf, a vibrant splash of crimson, seemed out of place among the muted school uniforms. She hadn't spoken since the news broke, but her fingers twitched nervously, betraying her unease. Beside her, Anne Shapland, Miss Bulstrode's efficient secretary, scribbled notes, her pen moving with mechanical precision. Only her tight jaw hinted at anything amiss. The police arrived shortly after breakfast, their black cars rolling through Meadowbank's wrought iron gates like an invasion. Inspector Kelsier, a broad-shouldered man with a weathered face, took charge, his clipped tone brooking no nonsense. He set up a command post in the headmistress's office, where Miss Bulstrode greeted him with a firm handshake. "Inspector, I trust you'll handle this discreetly," she said, her voice low. "Meadowbank's reputation is at stake. Parents will not take kindly to a murder on school grounds." Kelsey's eyes flicked to the window, where students milled about, casting nervous glances toward the pavilion, now cordoned off with tape. "Discretion is my aim, Miss Bulstrode, but murder doesn't play by rules. I'll need to question your staff and students, anyone who might have seen something last night." "Of course," she replied, though her lips tightened. "But I warn you, Inspector, my girls are shaken. Push too hard, and you'll get nothing but tears." Kelsey nodded, already turning to his notebook. "Let's start with the staff. Who was Miss Springer, and who might have wanted her dead?" Miss Bulstrode hesitated, her mind racing. Eleanor Springer had been a polarizing figure-brush, uncompromising, and fiercely dedicated to her role. She'd clashed with students and staff alike, her sharp tongue leaving a trail of grudges. But murder, that was a leap even Miss Bulstrode struggled to make. "She was direct," the headmistress said carefully. "Not everyone appreciated her methods, but she was excellent at her job. I can't imagine who would go this far." Kelsey's pen paused. "Can't or won't. Someone pulled that trigger, Miss Bulstrode, and I'm betting they're still here." The morning dragged on, with students confined to their classrooms, while the police combed the pavilion. Julia Upjohn, unable to shake the image of Miss Springer's determined stride the previous night, slipped out during a break and approached Miss Chadwick, who was pacing the corridor outside the staff room. "Miss Chadwick," Julia began, her voice hesitant, "I need to tell you something. Last night I saw Miss Springer heading to the pavilion. It was late, maybe 10 o'clock. She had a flashlight, and she looked like she was hunting for something." Miss Chadwick's face, already lined with worry, grew paler. "Julia, why didn't you say this earlier? The police need to know." "I wasn't sure it mattered," Julia said, twisting her fingers. "But now, with what happened, I think she knew someone was there." Miss Chadwick's hand trembled as she adjusted her glasses. "You did the right thing, dear. Come with me. We'll tell Inspector Kelsey together." As they walked toward the headmistress's office, Julia's eyes drifted to the pavilion, where officers were photographing the scene. A chill ran through her, not from the autumn air, but from the realization that the killer might be watching, hidden among the familiar faces of Meadowbank. In the pavilion, Inspector Kelsey crouched beside Miss Springer's body, now covered with a tarp. The forensic team worked methodically, dusting for prints and bagging lacrosse sticks for evidence. The bullet, a small caliber round, had been recovered from the floor, its casing gleaming under the harsh lights. Kelsey's partner, Sergeant Dodd, a wiry man with a penchant for detail, approached with a clipboard. "No prints on the bullet casing," Dodd said, clean as a whistle. "Whoever did this knew what they were doing." Kelsey frowned, standing. "No witnesses, no prints, no weapon. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment job." Springer walked into a trap. Dodd glanced at the scattered gym equipment. She was checking something out. "Maybe saw the light, like the groundskeeper said. But why her? What made her a target?" Kelsey's eyes narrowed. "That's what we're here to find out. Let's talk to the groundskeeper again. And I want a list of everyone who had access to this pavilion after hours." As the officers moved off, a shadow lingered just beyond the pavilion's open door. Adam Goodman, the new groundskeeper, leaned against a tree, his cap pulled low. His easy smile and boyish charm had won over the students, but his eyes now held a calculating glint. He'd been at Meadowbank only a week, hired to replace old Mr. Jenkins, who'd retired abruptly. Adam's hands, rough from work, toyed with a small notebook in his pocket, its pages filled with coded scribbles. He wasn't here for the lawns or the hedges. The Ramat jewels, whispered about in intelligence circles, were his mission, and Miss Springer's death was a complication he hadn't foreseen. By afternoon, the school's routine had crumbled. Classes were cancelled, and students gathered in small knots, their whispers a mix of fear and morbid curiosity. Jennifer Sutcliffe, usually the picture of confidence, sat on a bench near the tennis courts, her fingers tracing the grip of her tennis racket. Julia joined her, her brow furrowed. Double quotes Jen. "You've been weird about that racket all day," Julia said, keeping her voice low. "What's going on?" Jennifer's grip tightened, her knuckles whitening. "It's nothing, just, it's not balanced right. I might swap it out." Julia's eyes narrowed. You've never cared about that before, and you were fiddling with it all through breakfast. Is there something you're not telling me?" Jennifer forced a laugh, but it came out brittle. "Don't be daft, Julia. It's just a racket. You're seeing mysteries everywhere." Julia didn't press, but her mind churned. She'd noticed Jennifer's odd behavior since they'd returned to school. Her sudden obsession with the racket, her reluctance to let it out of her sight. It wasn't like Jennifer to be secretive, and Julia's instincts, honed by years of reading detective novels, told her something was amiss. Across the lawn, Shasta stood alone, her scarf fluttering in the breeze. She'd rebuffed the other girls' attempts at comfort, her thoughts elsewhere. The news of Miss Springer's death had shaken her, not because she'd liked the games Mistress Few did, but because it echoed the violence she'd fled in Rema. Her uncle's murder, the coup, the chaos, it all felt too close, as if the shadows of her past had followed her to this English haven. She glanced at the pavilion, her heart racing. The cryptic note she'd received at morning slipped under her dorm room door, burned in her memory. "Keep silent, or you'll be next." In Miss Bulstrode's office, the headmistress faced Inspector Kelsey, her composure fraying at the edges. "This cannot continue, Inspector," she said, her voice low but fierce. "Parents are already calling, demanding to know if their daughters are safe. If word of this spreads further, Meadowbank will be ruined." Kelsey leaned back in his chair, his expression unyielding. "I understand the stakes, Miss Bulstrode, but we're dealing with a murderer who's still on your grounds. I need your staff's schedules, access records, and any grudges Miss Springer might have stirred up." Miss Bulstrode's eyes flashed. Eleanor was abrasive. Yes, she pushed the girls hard, and some of the staff found her overbearing. "But to suggest one of us—" "I'm not suggesting," Kelsey interrupted. "I'm asking who had reason to hate her enough to kill." Miss Bulstrode hesitated, her mind racing through the faces of her staff. Miss Chadwick, loyal but emotional, had clashed with Eleanor over teaching methods. Miss Van Sittert, the senior mistress, had bristled at Eleanor's blunt critiques. Even Anne Shapland, usually unflappable, had once snapped at Eleanor during a staff meeting. But murder, the thought was unthinkable. "There's no one," she said finally. Eleanor was difficult, but she was part of Meadowbank. "We don't breed killers here." Kelsey's gaze didn't waver. "Someone did, Miss Bulstrode, and I'll find them with or without your help." As dusk fell, the school settled into an uneasy quiet. The pavilion remained cordoned off, its windows dark, but the air crackled with tension. Julia, unable to shake her unease, slipped into the dormitory common room, where a few girls huddled around a radio, its static-filled news broadcast mentioning the Ramet coup. Shasta sat apart, her fingers twisting the edge of her scarf. "Shasta," Julia said softly, sitting beside her. "Are you all right? You've been so quiet." Shasta's eyes flicked up, guarded. "It's nothing. Just this place feels wrong now." Julia nodded, her mind still on Jennifer's racket. "I know, but we'll figure it out. We have to." Shasta's lips parted, as if to speak, but she stopped herself, her gaze darting to the door. Julia followed her line of sight, and saw Anne Chaplin passing by, her clipboard tucked under her arm. For a moment their eyes met, and Julia felt a chill. Anne's smile was polite, but there was something cold in it, something that didn't reach her eyes. That night, Adam Goodman stood outside the pavilion, his notebook opened under the faint glow of a penlight. His coded notes detailed the movements, both the staff, the students, and the police. Miss Springer's death was no random act, it was tied to the jewels. He was sure, but who else knew, and who was desperate enough to kill for them? He glanced toward the dormitories, where a single light burned in Shaster's window. The princess was a puzzle. Her arrival at Meadowbank too convenient to be coincidence. And Jennifer's Racketadam had overheard Julia's conversation with her friend, and his instincts screamed that the girl was hiding something. He tucked the notebook away, his jaw set. The killer had struck once, and they'd strike again unless he moved faster. As he melted into the shadows, a faint creak came from the pavilion. Adam froze, his hand slipping to the knife hidden in his boot. The sound came again, deliberate, like a footstep on the wooden floor. Someone was inside, and they weren't supposed to be. The chapter closed with Meadowbank School teetering on the edge of panic, its pristine facade shattered by a single bullet. Julia lay awake in her dorm, her mind racing with questions about Jennifer's racket and Shaster's fear. Miss Bulstrode sat in her office, staring at a photograph of the school's founding, her heart heavy with the weight of its future. And somewhere in the darkness, a killer moved, their steps silent, their purpose deadly, as the first strike echoed into the night. Chapter 4. Whispers of a Princess. The morning sun spilled through the high windows of Meadowbank School's dining hall, casting golden bars across the polished oak tables. The clatter of cutlery and the hum of teenage voices filled the air. A deceptive veneer of normalcy draped over the undercurrent of our knees. It had been 2 days since Miss Springer's body was found in the sports pavilion, her life snuffed out by a single bullet. The police had come and gone, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a school teetering on the edge of scandal. At a corner table, Julia Upjohn pushed her scrambled eggs around her plate, her hazel eyes darting toward her friend Jennifer Sutcliffe. Jennifer, oblivious to the scrutiny, was tearing into a piece of toast with a ferocity that suggested it had personally offended her. "Jen," Julia said, her voice low, "you've been acting odd about that tennis racket of yours. What's the matter with it?" Jennifer froze mid-bite, her cheeks flushing a faint pink. "Nothing's wrong with it," she mumbled, crumbs tumbling onto her navy blazer. "It's just unbalanced. Makes my serve all wobbly." Julia narrowed her eyes. "Unbalanced? You were smashing aces with it last week, and now you want to swap it with mine. Come on, spill it." Before Jennifer could respond, a shadow fell over their table. Princess Shaster Ramat's enigmatic pupil stood there, her silk headscarf catching the light like a raven's wing. Her dark eyes, framed by lashes that seemed to carry secrets of their own, flicked between the two girls. "May I join you?" Shasta asked, her voice soft but carrying the weight of someone used to being obeyed. Julia hesitated, then gestured to an empty chair. "Sure, have a seat." Shasta settled gracefully, her movements deliberate, as if every gesture were part. "Have a performance." She picked up a silver spoon and stirred her tea. The clink of metal against porcelain, unnaturally loud in the sudden lull of their conversation. "I hear you speaking of tennis," Shasta said, her gaze fixed on Jennifer. "You play well, yes. Perhaps we could have a match sometime." Jennifer's fingers tightened around her knife. "Maybe," she said, her tone clipped. "I'm not really in the mood for games right now." Shasta's lips curved into a faint smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "Games are everywhere, Jennifer, even when we think we are not playing." The cryptic words hung in the air, and Julia felt a prickle of unease crawl up her spine. Shasta's presence was magnetic, but there was something unsettling about her, like a melody played in a minor key across the hall. Miss Bulstrode, the headmistress, stood by the arched doorway, her keen eyes scanning the room. Her grey hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her tailored suit gave her the air of a general surveying a battlefield. Beside her was Adam Goodman, the new groundskeeper, his lean frame slouched casually against the wall. To the untrained eye, he was just another hired hand, his calloused fingers and dirt-streaked boots marking him as a man of the earth. But Miss Bulstrode knew better. "Adam," she said under her breath, her lips barely moving, "have you noticed anything unusual among the girls, Shasta in particular?" Adam's blue eyes flickered toward the princess's table, where Shasta was now leaning toward Jennifer, speaking in a low murmur. "She's cagey," he replied, his voice equally discreet. "Keeps to herself, mostly, but I've seen her watching the others. Like she's sizing them up." Miss Bulstrode's jaw tightened. "She's Ramot royalty. Her uncle's murder in that coup has left her vulnerable. If there's a connection to Miss Springer's death—" She trailed off, her mind racing through possibilities. Adam straightened, his casual demeanor slipping for a moment to reveal the sharp edge beneath. "I'll keep an eye on her. And on that tennis racket Jennifer's been clutching like it's a state secret." Their conversation was cut short by the chime of the school bell, signaling the end of breakfast. Girls rose in a wave, their chairs scraping against the floor as they filed out toward their morning classes. Julia lingered, watching as Jennifer hurried off, her tennis racket slung over her shoulder like a talisman. Shasta, meanwhile, glided toward the exit, her headscarf fluttering as she passed Miss Bulstrode without a glance. The day unfolded with the rhythm of routine. Latin conjugations in room 3, quadratic equations in room 7, and the sharp crack bar of lacrosse sticks on the field. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. Whispers followed Shasta wherever she went, her exotic beauty and tragic backstory making her both an object of fascination and suspicion. In the library that afternoon, Julia found herself alone with Shasta, the two of them tucked into a corner alcove, surrounded by leather-bound tomes. Julia had been searching for a history text when she noticed Shasta standing by a window. a slim volume of poetry in her hands. The princess's fingers traced the embossed title, but her eyes were distant, fixed on the rolling lawns beyond Shasta. Julia ventured, closing her book with a soft thud. "Are you all right? You seem worried." Shasta's head snapped up, her expression guarded. For a moment, Julia thought she wouldn't answer. Then, with a sigh, Shasta set the book down and crossed her arms. "In my country," she said, "we learn early to watch for danger. The palace walls have ears, and even the roses in the garden can hide thorns. I am worried, yes, but not for myself." Julia frowned. "What do you mean?" Shasta hesitated, then leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "There is something here, Julia, something valuable. It came with one of you, hidden where no one would think to look, and someone is willing to kill for it." Julia's heart skipped a beat. She thought of Jennifer's tennis racket, the way her friend had guarded it, the sudden swap that morning. "You're talking about Jennifer, aren't you? What do you know?" Shasta's eyes darkened. "I know only what I see, and what I hear in the night, when the school is supposed to be asleep. Footsteps where there should be none, a voice, speaking in my language, outside my window." Julia's mouth went dry. "Have you told Miss Bulstrode?" Shasta shook her head. "I trust no one, not yet. In Ramat, trust is a luxury I could not afford. Here it is the same." Before Julia could press further, the library door creaked open, and Mademoiselle Blanche, the French teacher, appeared. Her thin face was pinched, her glasses glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Girls," she said sharply, "this is no place for gossip. Back to your studies." Shasta's expression shuttered, and she swept past Mademoiselle Blanche without a word. Julia followed, her mind churning. Something valuable, hidden. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the puzzle was still maddeningly incomplete. That evening, in the staff common room, Miss Bulstrode sat across from Adam Goodman, a steaming teapot between them. The room was cozy, with chintz, curtains, and a crackling fire, but the atmosphere was anything but warm. Adam's hands were steepled, his face set in a frown as he recounted his findings. "I've been through the embassy papers from Ramat," he said, keeping his voice low. "There's a reference to something called the cat. No details, just a code phrase. Could be the jewels, could be something else entirely." Miss Bulstrode's fingers tightened around her teacup. "The cat," she murmured. "And you think it's here, at Meadowbank?" Adam nodded. Bob Rawlinson, the prince's pilot, was seen with Jennifer Sutcliffe's family before the crash. If he hid the jewels, he'd have chosen something innocuous, like a schoolgirl's luggage. Miss Bulstrode's eyes widened. "Jennifer's tennis racket, exactly, and someone else knows it's here. Miss Springer's murder wasn't random. She saw something in that pavilion, something worth killing for." A knock at the door interrupted them. Miss Chadwick, the school's co-founder, poked her head in, her round face pale. "Miss Bulstrode, there's been an incident. Shasta received a note. She's in her room, refusing to speak." Miss Bulstrode rose, her expression grim. "Show me." Shasta's dorm room was a study in contrasts. Silk cushions and embroidered tapestries clashed with the utilitarian furniture of Meadowbank. The princess sat cross-legged on her bed, her headscarf discarded, revealing a cascade of dark hair. In her hands was a crumpled piece of paper, its edges singed as if she'd held it too close to a flame. "Shayster," Miss Bulstrode said gently. "What does the note say?" Shayster's eyes were red-rimmed, but her voice was steady. "It says, leave, or you will not see the next sunrise. It was slipped under my door an hour ago." Adam, standing by the doorway, exchanged a glance with Miss Bulstrode. "May I see it?" he asked. Shayster hesitated, then handed over the note. The paper was heavy, the ink a deep crimson that looked almost like blood. The words were written in a precise, slanting script, and at the bottom was a small sketch of a cat, its eyes rendered with eerie detail. "This isn't a schoolgirl's prank," Adam said, his voice tight. "Whoever wrote this knows about the cat." Miss Bulstrode's mind raced. "Shayster, you're not safe here. We'll move you to a secure room tonight, and I'll have the police informed." Shayster's chin lifted, a spark of defiance in her eyes. "I will not run. My uncle faced death with courage. So will I." Miss Bulstrode admired the girl's resolve, but the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. "Very well, but you'll have protection. Adam, see to it." As they left Shasta's room, Miss Bulstrode's thoughts turned to the tennis racket, the jewels, and the killer who seemed to be closing in. The school, once a sanctuary, now felt like a chessboard, with every move fraught with peril. Meanwhile, in the sports pavilion, a figure moved silently through the shadows. The moon cast slivers of light through the high windows, illuminating racks of lacrosse sticks and neatly stacked tennis balls. The figure paused by a locker, their gloved hands deftly picking the lock. Inside was Jennifer's tennis racket, its strings taut, its handle unremarkable to the untrained eye. The figure lifted the racket, turning it over with a predator's patience. A faint click sounded as they pressed a hidden catch, revealing a hollow compartment, but it was empty. The jewels were gone. A low curse escaped their lips, the sound swallowed by the night. They replaced the racket and slipped out, leaving no trace of their presence. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, carrying the faint scent of smoke from Shayster's burned note. The next morning, Julia cornered Jennifer in the corridor, her patience fraying. "Jen, I know you're hiding something. Shayster said there's something valuable here, and it's got to do with your racket. Tell me the truth." Jennifer's face crumpled, her bravado collapsing. "I don't know what's going on," she whispered. "Uncle Bob gave me that racket before he died. He said to keep it safe, but I didn't know. It was dangerous." Julia's eyes widened. "Your uncle, the pilot from Ramet." Jennifer nodded, tears welling. "I swapped rackets with you because I was scared. Someone's been watching me. I thought if I gave you the racket, they'd leave me alone." Julia's stomach twisted. She'd been carrying the racket all day, unaware of the danger it held. "We need to tell someone, Miss Bulstrode, or no." Jennifer grabbed her arm. "If we tell, they'll come after us." Promise me you'll keep quiet, Julia, please." Julia hesitated, torn between loyalty and fear. Finally, she nodded. "All right. But we're in this together now. No more secrets." As they parted ways, Julia's hand brushed against the racket slung over her shoulder. She didn't notice the faint outline of a cat scratched into the handle, its eyes glinting in the morning. Light dot in the headmistress's office. Miss Bulstrode sat at her desk, a stack of police reports before her. Inspector Kelsey had sent them over, but they offered little clarity. Miss Springer's murder remained unsolved, and the threat to Shasta had only deepened the mystery. A soft knock sounded, and Adam entered, his face grim. "I found something," he said, holding out a small leather-bound notebook. It was hidden in the pavilion behind a loose board. "Looks like Miss Springer's." Miss Bulstrode opened the notebook, her eyes scanning the neat, angular handwriting. The pages were filled with observations about the school staff schedules, student rivalries, even a note about Shasta's late-night walks. But one entry stood out, dated the night of the murder. "Saw light in pavilion, followed, heard, voice, Zermatt accent, mention of cat, must investigate." Miss Bulstrode's blood ran cold. She was onto them, she said, and they killed Kerr for it. Adam nodded. "The killer's still here, and they're getting desperate." As the school day drew to a close, the air grew heavy with the promise of a storm. Shasta stood by her dorm window, her silhouette framed against the gathering clouds. She clutched a small pendant, a gift from her uncle, its emerald center catching the last rays of sunlight. Somewhere in the shadows, the cat was watching, its claws unsheathed, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Chapter 5. The kidnapping. The morning sun filtered through the tall, arched windows of Meadowbank School for Girls, casting long golden stripes across the polished oak floors of the dining hall. The air buzzed with the chatter of students, their voices a lively hum over the clatter of porcelain and silverware. Yet beneath the surface of this orderly scene, a current of unease rippled through the room. The murder of Miss Springer, the game's mistress, just days ago, had left an indelible mark on the school. The students' laughter was a touch too shrill, their glances darting nervously toward the staff table, where Miss Bulstrode, the headmistress, sat with her usual composed authority, her sharp eyes scanning the room. Jennifer Sutcliffe, her blonde curls bouncing as she leaned toward her friend Julia. Upjohn whispered, "It's not right, is it? The way everyone's pretending nothing happened." Her spoon hovered over her porridge, untouched, as her blue eyes flickered toward the empty chair where Miss Springer once sat. Julia, her dark hair pulled into a neat ponytail, nodded, her brow furrowed. "It's like they're all holding their breath, waiting for something else to go wrong." She pushed her plate aside, her appetite gone. "And Shasta, she's been so strange lately. Did you see how she barely spoke at supper last night?" Jennifer frowned, her fingers tightening around her spoon. "She's always strange. All that talk about her uncle and Ramatits like she's hiding something. And that chauffeur, who's always hovering around her. Creepy." At the staff table, Miss Bulstrode's gaze lingered on the two girls, her mind turning over the events of the past few days. The murder had shaken Meadowbank to its core, threatening the school's impeccable reputation. She had spent sleepless nights weighing her options: close the school temporarily and risk losing students, or press on and maintain the facade of normalcy. Her decision to keep the school open had been resolute, but now, as she observed the strained faces of her staff and students, doubt gnawed at her. Beside her, Miss Chadwick, the school's co-founder and her loyal confidant, sipped her tea with a trembling hand. "Eleanor, we must do something about the parents," she murmured, her voice low. "I've had 3 letters this morning alone, demanding to know what we're doing to keep the girls safe." Miss Bulstrode's lips pressed into a thin line. "We've doubled the night patrols, and Inspector Kelsey assures me his men are combing every inch of the grounds. We cannot let fear dictate our actions," chatted Bus. Her words carried less conviction than usual, and Miss Chadwick's worried eyes met hers for a fleeting moment before they both looked away. Outside, the school's sprawling lawns shimmered with dew, and Adam Goodman, the new groundskeeper, moved with quiet purpose, trimming the hedges near the sports pavilion. His tanned face and easy smile had already won over several of the younger girls, who giggled as they passed him on their way to morning lessons. But Adam's thoughts were far from pruning shears and rosebushes. His cover as a ground was a carefully crafted lie, one that allowed him to roam the school freely, his eyes and ears attuned to every whisper, every anomaly. As a British agent tasked with recovering the Ramat jewels, he knew the stakes were higher than a schoolyard murder. The jewels, hidden by Bob Rollinson before his death, were somewhere on these grounds, possibly in the possession of an unsuspecting student. Adam paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and glanced toward the main building. His contact in London had sent a coded message that morning, buried in a mundane letter about gardening supplies. "The cat is among the pigeons. Trust no one." The phrase had chilled him, not for its melodrama, but for its implications. Someone at Meadowbank was more than they seemed. Predator cloaked in the guise of respectability. The morning passed in a blur of lessons, with the girls moving from French conjugations to geometry, their minds only half engaged. By noon the sun had climbed high, and the school's courtyard was alive with students spilling out for lunch. Shyster, the princess from Ramat, stood apart from the others, her silk scarf fluttering in the breeze as she stared toward the distant hills. Her dark eyes were guarded, her posture rigid, as if she sensed the weight of unseen eyes upon her. Julia, sitting on a stone bench with Jennifer, nudged her friend. "Look at her. She's been like that all morning. It's not just the murder she's scared of something." Jennifer shrugged, tearing a piece of bread in half. "Maybe she's just homesick. Or maybe she's worried about her uncle's coup. My mum says it was all over the papers, people getting killed left and right in Ramat." Before Julia could reply, a sleek black car rolled through the school's iron gates, its tires crunching on the gravel drive. The girls froze, their chatter dying away as the car stopped near the main entrance. A man in a crisp chauffeur's uniform stepped out, his face obscured by a low cap. He moved with a brisk efficiency, opening the rear door and gesturing toward Shasta. Miss Bulstrode, alerted by a student's cry, emerged from the dining hall, her heels clicking sharply on the flagstones. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the sudden silence. The chauffeur bowed slightly, his accent polished but unplaceable. "Miss Bulstrode, I am here on behalf of Shasta's uncle. He has requested her immediate return to London for her safety, given recent events." Shasta's face paled, her hands clutching her scarf. "My uncle. But she stopped, her words catching in her throat as she glanced nervously at the chauffeur. Miss Bulstrode's eyes narrowed. "I was not informed of any such arrangement." "Shasta, do you know this man?" The princess hesitated, her gaze flickering between the headmistress and the chauffeur. I'm not sure. He looks like the driver my uncle sent before, but..." The chauffeur's smile was thin, almost predatory. "Her uncle's instructions were urgent, madame. I have papers, if you'd like to see them." Miss Bulstrode extended her hand, her expression unyielding. "I would indeed." As the chauffeur reached into his jacket, Adam Goodman appeared at the edge of the courtyard, his pruning shears dangling loosely in one hand. His casual stance belied the tension in his shoulders, his eyes locked on the scene. Something about the chauffeur's movements, the way his hand lingered inside his jacket, the slight shift of his weight set, Adam's instincts on edge. He took a step closer, his hand slipping into his pocket, where a small, concealed knife waited. The chauffeur produced a folded document, handing it to Miss Bulstrode with a deferential nod. She scanned it quickly, her brow furrowing. "This appears in order, but I will need to verify it with Shasta's guardian directly. She will remain here until I do." The chauffeur's smile faltered, a flash of irritation crossing his face, before he masked it. "Of course, madame, but time is of the essence. Her uncle is most insistent." "Then he can wait," Miss Bulstrode snapped, her tone brooking no argument. She turned to Shasta. "Come with me to my office, my dear. We'll sort this out." Shasta nodded, her steps faltering as she followed the headmistress. The chauffeur watched them go, his eyes narrowing before he returned to his car, the engine purring to life as he drove away. The courtyard erupted in whispers, the girls' voices a mix of fear and excitement. Julia grabbed Jennifer's arm. "That was weird, wasn't it?" Shasta looked like she was going to faint. Jennifer nodded, her gaze fixed on the retreating car. "Something's not right. Did you see how he kept looking at her? Like he was, I don't know, sizing her up." Adam, meanwhile, slipped away from the courtyard, his mind racing. The chauffeur's papers might have been convincing, but his demeanor screamed deception. Adam needed to get to a phone, to contact his handler and run a check on the man. If Shasta was a target, the jewels were closer than he'd thought, and the danger was escalating. By late afternoon, the school was a hive of tension. Miss Bulstrode's attempts to reach Shasta's guardian in London had yielded only vague assurances from a secretary, who promised to call back. Shasta, sequestered in the headmistress's office, sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes darting to the window every few minutes. "I don't understand," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. "My uncle is dead. Everyone knows that. Why would someone pretend to be his driver?" Miss Bulstrode, seated behind her desk, leaned forward, her expression softening. "Shasta, is there anything you haven't told me? Anything about your family, or anything you brought with you from Ramet?" Shasta's fingers tightened on her scarf, her lips parting as if to speak, but she shook her head. "No, nothing. I just want to stay here, where it's safe." But Meadowbank was anything but safe. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the grounds, the chauffeur's car returned, this time parking just beyond the school's gates, out of sight. Inside, the man removed his cap, revealing a sharp-featured face and cold, calculating eyes. He pulled a small radio from the glove compartment, speaking in a low, clipped tone. "She's still here. Bulstrode's suspicious, but I'll have her by tonight. The package is close. I can feel it." A crackling voice responded, "No mistakes, Victor. We need those jewels, and we need her alive." "For now," Victor smirked, tucking the radio away. He slipped out of the car, blending into begathering dusk, his silhouette vanishing among the trees that lined Meadowbank's perimeter. In the dormitory, Julia and Jennifer sat cross-legged on Julia's bed, their voices hushed as they dissected the day's events. The other girls were at supper, leaving the room quiet, save for the creak of the floorboards and the distant hum. "Put up the school's generator. I don't trust that chauffeur," Julia said, her eyes narrowing. "And Shasta, she's hiding something." "Did you see how she reacted when Miss Bulstrode asked about her uncle?" Jennifer nodded, her fingers absently toying with the handle of her tennis racket, which lay across her lap. "Maybe it's got something to do with her uncle's coup. My dad says there were all sorts of shady people involved. Spies, smugglers, you name it." Julia's gaze flicked to the racket, her curiosity piqued. "You've been weird about that racket lately, Jen. What's going on? You swapped it with mine the other day, and now you're always fiddling with it." Jennifer's cheeks flushed, and she set the racket aside. "It's nothing. It's just, it feels off, that's all. The balance isn't right." Julia wasn't convinced. She reached for the racket, ignoring Jennifer's protest, and turned it over in her hands. The handle felt oddly heavy, the grip slightly loose. She tapped it against her palm, frowning. "This isn't your usual racket, is it? Did you get a new one?" Jennifer snatched it back, her voice sharp. "It's mine, okay. Just leave it." But Julia's mind was racing. She'd read enough detective stories to know when something didn't add up, and Jennifer's defensiveness was a glaring clue. She decided to keep a closer eye on her friend and the racket. As night fell, the school settled into an uneasy quiet. Miss Bulstrode had posted extra staff at the entrances, and Inspector Kelsey's men patrolled the grounds, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. But Victor was no amateur. He moved like a shadow, slipping past the patrols with ease, his footsteps silent on the grass. His target was the dormitory where Shasta slept, or so he thought. Inside, Shasta sat on her bed, her knees drawn up to her chest. She hadn't eaten, hadn't spoken since her meeting with Miss Bulstrode. The cryptic note she'd burned earlier that week haunted her. "Give us what's ours, or you'll never see Ramat again." She didn't know who us was, but she knew what they wanted, the jewels her uncle had hidden before his death. She'd overheard him speaking to Bob Rawlinson in the palace, their voices low and urgent, but she hadn't understood the full scope of their plan until now. The jewels were here at Meadowbank, and someone was willing to kill for them. A soft creak outside her door made her freeze. She held her breath, her eyes fixed on the handle as it turned slowly. The door swung open, revealing Victor's silhouette, his face half lit by the moonlight. He held a cloth in one hand, its sharp chemical scent filling the room. "Don't scream, princess," he whispered, his voice smooth as silk. "This will be quick." Shasta's scream was cut off as he lunged, the cloth pressed against her face. She struggled, her nails clawing at his arm, but the chloroform worked quickly, her body going limp in his grasp. Victor hoisted her over his shoulder, moving swiftly to the window. He'd disabled the lock earlier that day, and now it slid open with a soft click. He dropped to the ground outside, Shasta's weight barely slowing him as he melted into the shadows. The next morning, the school was in chaos. Shasta's empty bed, the open window, and the faint scent of chloroform told a grim story. Miss Bulstrode stood in the dormitory, her face pale but resolute, as Inspector Kelsey questioned the girls. Julia and Jennifer stood at the edge of the room, their faces ashen. "She's gone," Julia whispered, her voice trembling. "Someone took her, Jen, and I bet it's got something to do with that chauffeur." Jennifer clutched her tennis racket tightly, her knuckles white. What if it's about something else? Something we don't know about? Julia's eyes narrowed. "Like what? You know something, don't you?" Before Jennifer could respond, Adam Goodman appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. He'd spent the night scouring the grounds for clues, finding only a single tire track near the back gate. He approached Miss Bulstrode, speaking in a low voice. "I found something in the pavilion," he said, handing her a folded piece of paper. It was tucked under a bench. "Looks like a coded message." Miss Bulstrode unfolded it, her eyes scanning the cryptic symbols. "The cat prowls at midnight. The prize is in the game." Her jaw tightened. "This is no prank, Mr. Goodman. We're dealing with professionals." Adam nodded, his mind racing. The message confirmed his suspicions. The jewels were hidden in something related to the game. A tennis racket, perhaps. His gaze flicked to Jennifer, who stood clutching hers like a lifeline. He needed to get closer to her to find out what she knew. As the day wore on, the school's atmosphere grew suffocating. Parents began arriving, their cars clogging the drive as they demanded to take their daughters home. Miss Bulstrode stood firm, assuring them that the police were in control. but her words rang hollow. The kidnapping had shattered any illusion of safety, and the staff were fraying at the edges. Miss Chadwick, her eyes red from crying, hovered near the headmistress, her usual stoicism crumbling. Julia, meanwhile, couldn't shake the image of Jennifer's racket. She slipped away during the lunch hour, sneaking into their shared dormitory. The racket lay on Jennifer's bed, its grip slightly worn. Julia hesitated, then picked it up, her fingers probing the handle. It felt wrong, heavier than it should be. She twisted the grip, her heart pounding as it loosened, revealing a hollow compartment inside. Her breath caught. Nestled within was a small velvet pouch, its contents glinting in the dim light. She tipped it out, and a single emerald rolled into her palm, its facets catching the sunlight like a tiny green star. Her mind raced. This was no ordinary gemmette, was part of the Ramet jewels, the ones her mother had mentioned in passing, linked to the coup that had killed Shaster's uncle. Julia's hands trembled as she replaced the emerald and tightened the grip. She couldn't tell Jennifer not yet. Her friend's odd behavior suggested she might know more than she was letting on, and Julia wasn't sure who to trust. But one thing was clear. The jewels were here, and someone was willing to kidnap her, kilt to get them. She slipped the racket back onto the bed and hurried to the library, her mind made up. She needed help, someone who could unravel this mess before anyone else got hurt. Her mother had once mentioned a detective little man with a moustache who could solve any puzzle. Hercule Poirot. If anyone could save Shaster and stop the killer, it was him. As dusk settled over Meadowbank, the school felt like a fortress under siege. Adam Goodman stood by the sports pavilion, his eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of Victor. The coded message burned in his pocket, its meaning still elusive. He knew the jewels were close, but so was the enemy, and time was running out. In Shaster's dorm room, a single emerald lay on her pillow, unnoticed by the police. It was a message, a taunt from Victor, to whoever was hunting him. The cat was indeed among the pigeons, and the game was far from over. Chapter 6. The second victim. The air at Meadowbank School hung heavy with unease, like a fog that refused to lift. The murder of Miss Springer, the game's mistress, had cast a pall over the manicured lawns and ivy-clad walls. Whispers darted through the dormitories, sharp and fleeting as minnows, while the girls' laughter, once bright, now carried a nervous edge. The police, led by the methodical Inspector Kelsey, had cordoned off the sports pavilion, their boots trampling the dew-soaked grass. Yellow tape fluttered like grim ribbons, a stark reminder of the violence that had invaded this bastion of English decorum. Miss Eleanor Van Sittert, the senior history mistress, stood at her classroom window, her lips pressed into a thin line. At 42, she was a woman of rigid posture and sharper intellect, her graying hair pulled into a severe bun that mirrored her nonsense demeanor. She had taught at Meadowbank for nearly 2 decades, her lessons on the Tudors and Stuarts delivered with a precision that bordered on reverence. Yet now her gaze lingered on the pavilion, where Miss Springer's body had been found just days ago, a bullet through her heart. The image gnawed at her, not out of sentiment, Miss Springer had been abrasive. Her barked orders on the lacrosse field grating on Eleanor's nerves, but because it disrupted the order she cherished. Meadowbank was supposed to be a sanctuary, not a crime scene. Miss Vansittart. A timid voice broke her reverie. Eleanor turned to see Julia Upjohn, a slight girl with wide, inquisitive eyes, clutching a history textbook. Julia's friend, Jennifer Sutcliffe, hovered behind her, her blonde hair mussed from the morning's tennis practice. "Yes, Julia." Eleanor's tone was brisk, though not unkind. She adjusted her glasses, peering at the girls over the rims. "I was wondering about the essay on Elizabeth I," Julia said, her voice hesitant. "You mentioned her spies, like Walsingham. Did they ever fail to catch someone dangerous?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow, sensing a subtext she couldn't quite grasp. Walsingham's network was formidable, but no system is infallible. "Why do you ask?" Julia shifted, glancing at Jennifer, who was fiddling with the strap of her satchel. "Just curious," Julia mumbled. "With everything happening, it feels like no one's safe." Eleanor's expression softened, though her voice remained firm. "The police are handling it, Julia. Focus on your studies. Meadowbank will weather this storm." The girls nodded and scurried off, but Eleanor's unease deepened. Julia's question lingered, sharp as a pinprick. She turned back to the window, her eyes narrowing as a flicker of light caught her attention, a faint, darting glow from the sports pavilion, like a firefly trapped in the dark. It was past 9 o'clock, and the school grounds should have been still. Her pulse quickened. She reached for the heavy sandbag she kept on her desk, a relic from a wartime drill, its weight reassuring in her hand. If someone was skulking about, she would confront them herself. The night was cool, the air laced with the scent of damp earth and blooming roses. Eleanor moved swiftly across the lawn, her sensible shoes silent on the grass. The pavilion loomed ahead, its silhouette stark against the moonless sky. The light she'd seen had vanished, but she pressed on, her grip tightening round the sandbag. She wasn't one for hysterics, but the memory of Miss Springer's fate was a cold weight in her chest. If an intruder was prowling, she wouldn't let them slip through her fingers. The pavilion door creaked as she pushed it open, the sound echoing in the empty space. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the tang of polished wood and leather. Her flashlight beams swept across the room, illuminating racks of lacrosse sticks and neatly folded gym uniforms. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting into shapes that set her nerves on edge. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steady despite the thud of her heart. A faint rustle answered, barely audible from the far corner. Eleanor stepped forward, her beam cutting through the gloom. "Show yourself," she demanded, raising the sandbag. The rustle grew louder, and then a figure darted from behind a stack of equipment, their silhouette blurred by speed. Eleanor swung the sandbag, but the figure was too quick, slipping past her and out the door. Her flashlight caught only a glimpse, a dark coat, a glint of metal at their waist. Fury surged through her. She gave chase, her breath sharp in her throat, but the figure vanished into the night, swallowed by the shadows beyond the pavilion. Eleanor stood panting, her flashlight trembling in her hand. Whoever it was, they were no amateur. She turned back to the pavilion, determined to find what they'd been after. Her beam fell on a small, overturned crate in the corner. Its contents old scorebooks and a dusty tennis racket spilled across the floor. She frowned. The racket looked out of place, its strings taut and new, unlike the worn equipment around it. Eleanor knelt, her fingers brushing the handle. It felt wrong, heavier than it should have been. She turned it over, inspecting the grip, when a faint click sounded behind her. Before she could turn, a shadow loomed, and pain exploded at the base of her skull. The sandbag slipped from her hand as she crumpled to the floor, her flashlight rolling away, its beam spinning wildly before winking out. Morning broke over Meadowbank with a cruel clarity. The scream that shattered the silence came from Ginny. Travers, a third year, who'd ventured to the pavilion to retrieve a forgotten gym shoe. She stumbled back, her face ashen, as she pointed to Miss Vansittart body sprawled across the floor, blood pooling beneath her shattered skull. The news spread like wildfire, girls clustering in tearful knots as teachers tried to maintain order. Miss Honoria Bulstrode, the headmistress, stood in her office, her face a mask of controlled fury. At 55, she was a formidable woman, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her eyes sharp as cut glass. Meadowbank was her legacy, built on discipline and excellence, and now it teetered on the brink of ruin. Put in murders in a week. Parents were already withdrawing their daughters, their letters arriving in a flood of crisp stationery and veiled threats. She turned to Inspector Kelsey, who stood by her desk, his notebook open but his expression grim. "This is a disaster, Inspector," she said, her voice low but laced with steel. "First Springer, now Vansittart. If you don't find this killer, there won't be a school left to protect." Kelsey nodded, his jaw tight. "We're doing everything we can, Miss Bulstrode. Forensics is combing the pavilion now. The murder weapon appears to be a blunt object, possibly that sandbag found near the body, but there's no clear motive yet. No motive." Miss Bulstrode's eyes flashed. "Two teachers dead in the same building. This isn't random, Inspector. Someone is targeting my school." Kelsey hesitated, then lowered his voice. "We're looking into the staff's backgrounds, but it's slow going. Miss Vansittart, did she have enemies? Anyone who might have wanted her out of the way?" Miss Bulstrode's lips tightened. Eleanor was prickly, but not enough to inspire murder. She was loyal to Meadowbank, almost to a fault. If anything, she was too rigid, too wedded to tradition. Kelsey scribbled a note. "We'll need to interview the girls again, especially those close to the pavilion. Someone must have seen something." As Kelsey left, Miss Bulstrode's gaze drifted to the window, where the pavilion stood like a silent accusation. She hadn't told him about Adam Goodman, the new groundskeeper who'd arrived just before the term began. His references were impeccable, but something about his easy charm and watchful eyes unsettled her. She'd caught him lingering near the pavilion more than once, his hands in his pockets, his gaze too sharp for a man tasked with trimming hedges. If he was more than he seemed, She needed to know before another body was found in the dormitory. Julia Upjohn sat cross-legged on her bed, her history textbook forgotten. Her friend Jennifer was across the room, lacing her tennis shoes with a distracted air. The swapped tennis racket lay on Jennifer's bed, its presence a nagging puzzle in Julia's mind. She'd noticed Jennifer's odd attachment to it ever since the swap with her own racket, a move Jennifer had brushed off as a whim. But Julia wasn't so sure. There was something about the way Jennifer's fingers lingered on the handle, as if guarding a secret. "Jen," Julia said, keeping her voice casual, "why'd you swap rackets again? Yours was fine, wasn't it?" Jennifer's hands stilled, her blue eyes flickering with something unreadable. "It's just unbalanced. The grip felt off. Yours is better." Julia frowned. "But you were so keen on that one before. You kept checking it, like you thought someone would nick it." Jennifer laughed. "But it was brittle, like glass about to crack." "Don't be daft, Julia. It's just a racket. Anyway, with Miss Van Sittart gone, I don't even want to play tennis anymore. This place is cursed." Julia didn't press further, but her curiosity burned. She'd seen the racket in Jennifer's hands too many times, the way her friend's eyes darted to it when she thought no one was watching. And now, with 2 teachers dead, both near the pavilion where sports equipment was stored, Julia's mind raced with possibilities. She didn't believe in curses, but she did believe in secrets. And Jennifer was hiding one. Across the grounds, Adam Goodman leaned against a shed, his cap pulled low as he watched the police cordon off the pavilion. At 28, he was lean and broad-shouldered, his dark hair tousled just enough to seem careless. But there was nothing careless about his eyes, which scanned the scene with a predator's focus. His cover as a groundskeeper was holding, but the murders were complicating his mission. He'd been sent to Meadowbank by a shadowy figure known only as Mr. Robinson, a broker of secrets who operated in the murky world of international espionage. Adam's task was clear: recover the Ramet jewels, smuggled out of the Middle East in the chaos of the coup. The trail had led him here, to a schoolgirl's tennis racket. But the killings were a dangerous wildcard. He'd seen Miss Van Sittart heading toward the pavilion last night, her flashlight bobbing in the dark. He'd almost followed, but his orders were strict. Stay low, observe, don't interfere. Now he regretted it. The killer was closing in on the jewels, and every death tightened the noose around his mission. He needed to find the racketant, the girl who carried it before the killer did. Adam's thoughts were interrupted by Miss Chadwick, the school's co-founder, hurrying across the lawn. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, as if she hadn't slept. She stopped near the pavilion, staring at the police tape with a mixture of grief and defiance. Adam straightened, his instincts prickling. Miss Chadwick was a fixture at Meadowbank, her loyalty to Miss Bulstrode legendary. But there was something brittle in her posture, like a woman carrying a weight too heavy to bear. "Mr. Goodman," she called, spotting him. Her voice was sharp, but it trembled at the edges. "Have you seen anything unusual near the pavilion? Anything at all?" Adam kept his expression neutral. "Nothing out of the ordinary, Miss Chadwick. Just the police." coming and going. Terrible business. Though she nodded, but her eyes lingered on him, searching. Yes, terrible. If you see anything at all, you'll tell me, won't you? Of course, he said, tipping his cap. But as she walked away, her shoulders hunched. Adam's mind raced. Miss Chadwick was rattled, more than grief. Alone could explain. Did she know something about the murders? Or was she, like him, chasing a secret she couldn't share? That evening, Julia slipped into the library, a quiet sanctuary of polished oak and leather-bound books. She'd been turning the racket over in her mind all day, her thoughts a tangle of suspicion and fear. The library was empty, save for the faint rustle of pages as Miss Rich, the English teacher, graded essays at a corner desk. Miss Rich was an oddity at Meadowbank, her dark hair and intense eyes setting her apart from the staid staff. She had a way of speaking, soft but piercing, that made Julia feel as if her thoughts were being read. "Julia," Miss Rich said, looking up, "shouldn't you be in the common room with the others?" Julia hesitated, clutching her satchel. "I needed a book for my history essay on spies." Miss Rich's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Spies? You're full of surprises. Try the shelf by the window. There's a biography on Walsingham that might suit." Julia nodded, but as she moved to the shelf, she felt Miss Rich's eyes on her, heavy and unblinking. She grabbed a book at random, her fingers brushing a small folded note tucked between the pages. She glanced at Miss Rich, who was now bent over her essays, and slipped the note into her pocket. Back in her dorm, she unfolded it under the dim glow of her bedside lamp. The words, scrawled in a hurried hand, sent a chill down her spine. "The cat watches. Return what's hers, or the claws come out." Julia's breath caught. The cat. She'd heard the term before, whispered in connection to Shyster's kidnapping. Was it a code, a person? And why had the note been in the library, where anyone could find it? Her eyes darted to Jennifer's bed, where the tennis racket lay, its handle gleaming faintly in the moonlight. She had to know what was inside it. With trembling hands, Julia picked up the racket, her fingers probing the grip. It was heavier than hers, the balance off, just as Jennifer had said. She twisted the end cap, expecting resistance, but it gave way with a soft pop. Inside, nestled in a hollowed-out compartment, was a small velvet pouch. She tipped it into her palm, and a single emerald rolled out, its facets catching the light like a frozen flame. Her heart pounded. This was no ordinary racket. This was the secret people were dying for. Julia stuffed the pouch back into the handle, her mind racing. She couldn't tell Jennifer not yet. Her friend was acting too strangely, too guarded, and the teachers, even Miss Bulstrode, might be compromised. She needed someone she could trust, someone who could unravel this deadly puzzle. Her mother's stories of a quirky Belgian detective flashed through her mind. Hercule Poirot, the man who saw through lies with his little grey cells. If anyone could help, it was him. As night fell, Meadowbank seemed to hold its breath. The police had left their search yielding little beyond the sandbag and a few scuff marks in the pavilion. Miss Bulstrode sat alone in her office, her fingers tracing the edge of a letter from a parent demanding their daughter's withdrawal. The school was hemorrhaging students, its reputation fraying with each passing day. She thought of Miss Chadwick, her oldest friend, whose tears that morning had shaken her more than she cared to admit. Chatty was loyal, but loyalty could blind, puss much as it bound. A knock at the door startled her. Adam Goodman stood there, his cap in his hands, his expression unreadable. "Miss Bulstrode, I need to speak with you, privately." She gestured to a chair, her eyes narrowing. "Go on, Mr. Goodman." He closed the door, his voice low. "I'm not just a groundskeeper. I work for certain people. There's something at Meadowbank, something valuable that's drawing blood. I think you know more than you're letting on." Miss Bulstrode's face remained impassive, but her pulse quickened. "And what makes you think I'd trust you, Mr. Goodman? You've been here barely a week, and bodies are piling up." Adam leaned forward, his eyes steady. "Because I'm not the only one watching. Someone else is after it, someone who doesn't care who gets hurt. Help me, and we can stop them." She studied him, weighing his words against the chaos threatening her school. Finally, she nodded. "Tell me what you're looking for." Adam hesitated, then spoke a single word. "Jewels." In her dorm, Julia lay awake, the racket hidden beneath her pillow. The emerald burned in her memory, its weight a promise and prey a threat. She didn't know who the cat was, but she knew one thing. The killer was close, their claws already stained with blood. Tomorrow she would slip away to London to find Hercule Poirot. If Meadowbank was to survive, she needed a mind sharper than her own one that could see through the shadows and unmask the predator lurking among them. The chapter closed with the distant hoot of an owl, its cry swallowed by the night. Somewhere in the darkness, a figure watched the dormitory windows, their eyes glinting with a hunger that no jewel could sat. Chapter 7. Julia's gambit the air at Meadowbank School for girls hung heavy with dread. The once vibrant halls now cloaked in a hush that seemed to swallow laughter whole. The murders of Miss Springer and Miss Van Sittart had cast a pall over the summer term, and the students' whispers carried a nervous edge, their eyes darting to every shadow. Julia Upjohn, a slight girl with sharp hazel eyes and a mind that refused to rest, felt the weight of it all pressing against her chest. The tennis racket, Jennifer's tennis racket, now in her possession after that odd swap gnawed at her. Thoughts like a splinter she couldn't ignore. It wasn't just unbalanced, as Jennifer had claimed. There was something wrong with it, something that made her stomach twist whenever she held it. It was late afternoon, the sky outside painted in bruised purples and oranges, when Julia sat cross-legged on her dormitory bed, the racket balanced across her knees. Her roommate, Jennifer Sutcliffe, was out at the library, leaving Julia alone with her suspicions. She turned the racket over, her fingers tracing the worn grip. It felt heavier than it should, not in weight but in presence, as if it carried a secret it was daring her to uncover. She'd noticed Jennifer's strange attachment to it, the way her friend's eyes lingered on it before the swap, the way she'd brushed off Julia's questions with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. And then there was that flicker of movement Julia had caught last night, her shadow slipping past the dormitory window, too deliberate to be a stray cat or a branch in the wind. Julia's mother, Joan, had always said she had a nose for trouble, a trait inherited from her wartime days in intelligence. "You're like a terrier with a bone," Joan had teased once, ruffling Julia's hair. "Once you've got a scent, you don't let go." That memory sparked something in Julia now, a flicker of resolve. She couldn't go to Miss Bulstrode. Not yet. The headmistress was too busy managing the school's unraveling reputation. The police, led by Inspector Kelsey, were methodical but slow, their questions circling the obvious without touching the undercurrents. Julia sensed, no, she needed someone sharper, someone who could see through the fog of fear and lies. That's when the name came to her. Hercule Poirot. Her mother had mentioned him once, years ago, during a rare story about her time decoding messages for Belize. "A funny little man with a moustache like a work of art," Joan had said, chuckling. "But his mind, oh Julia, his mind could cut through steel." Poirot had unraveled a spy ring in London, Joan had claimed, with nothing but a few cryptic telegrams and a waiter's nervous tick. If anyone could make sense of Meadowbank's chaos, it was him. The decision crystallized in Julia's mind like frost on a window pane. She would go to London, find Poirot, and tell him everything about the racket, the murders, the strange feeling that the school was a chessboard and she was a pawn being hunted. It was a reckless plan, but recklessness felt like the only way to outrun the fear creeping up her spine. The next morning, Julia waited until breakfast, when the dining hall was a clamor of clinking plates and forced chatter. Miss Bulstrode's absentee was meeting with parents, threatening to withdraw their daughters, gave Julia her chance. She slipped a note under Jennifer's plate, claiming a sudden stomachache and a need to rest in the infirmary. It was a flimsy lie, but Jennifer, distracted by a letter from her mother, barely glanced at it. Julia packed a small satchel, her purse, a change of clothes, and the tennis racket, wrapped in a sweater to muffle its shape. She tucked her savings, a handful of coins and crumpled notes, into her pocket. The train to London wasn't cheap, but she'd saved enough from her allowance to cover a return ticket. Getting out of Meadowbank was easier than she'd feared. The groundskeeper, Adam Goodman, was busy repairing a fence near the main gate, his broad shoulders hunched over a pile of wooden slats. Julia had seen him talking to Miss Bulstrode late at night, his easy smile masking something sharper, something that made her wonder if he was more than he seemed. She ducked behind a hedge, waiting until he turned away, then darted through the gate, her heart pounding like a drum. The walk to the village station was a mile, the country lane lined with wildflowers that swayed in the breeze. Julia kept her head down, the racket's weight pulling at her arm. Every rustle in the bushes made her flinch, her imagination conjuring the killer a faceless figure with a sandbag or a silenced pistol. By the time she reached the platform, Her blouse was damp with sweat, and the whistle of the approaching train felt like a lifeline. The journey to London was a blur of green fields and clattering wheels. Julia sat by the window, her fingers tapping nervously on the racket's handle. She rehearsed what she'd say to Poirot, trying to organize her thoughts into something coherent. 2 teachers dead, a princess kidnapped, a tennis racket that doesn't feel right, and a school where everyone's hiding something. Would he believe her? A 14-year-old girl with no proof but a gut feeling. She had to make him see. London greeted her with a cacophony of horns and voices, the air thick with coal smoke, and the tang of roasted chestnuts. Julia navigated the crowded streets of Charing Cross, clutching a scrap of paper with Poirot's address, gleaned from an old letter her mother had kept. The building was a discreet Georgian affair, its brass plaque reading H. Poirot, Consulting Detective. Her knock was answered by a prim man in a black suit, his expression a mix of curiosity and disapproval. "Monsieur Poirot is not expecting visitors," he said, his voice clipped. "May I have your name?" "Julia Upjohn," she replied, straightening her shoulders. "It's urgent. Tell him it's about Meadowbank School and murder." The man's eyebrow twitched, but he ushered her into a small sitting room, its walls lined with books and a faint scent of lavender polish. Julia perched on a velvet chair, the racket resting across her lap like a shield. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching her nerves tighter, until the door opened and Hercule Poirot entered. He was exactly as her mother had described, small, dapper, with a moustache so meticulously groomed it seemed to have a life of its own. His eyes, bright and piercing, fixed on Julia with an intensity that made her feel both seen and dissected. "Mademoiselle Upjohn," he said, his voice smooth with a faint Belgian lilt. "You have come a long way, and with a tennis racket. No less. Tell me, what brings a schoolgirl to the door of Hercule Poirot?" Julia took a deep breath, the words tumbling out like water from a burst dam. She told him everything. The murders of Miss Springer and Miss Van Sittart, Shyster's kidnapping, the swapped tennis racket, and the hollowed-out handle she'd discovered last night, its edges rough as if carved in haste. She described the school's undercurrents, the way Miss Bulstrode's calm seemed forced, the way Adam Goodman's charm didn't match his watchful eyes, the way Jennifer's laughter had grown brittle. Poirot listened, his head tilted, his fingers steepled under his chin. "And this racket," he said when she finished, gesturing to the bundle in her lap. "You believe it holds a secret worth killing for." "I know it sounds mad," Julia said, her cheeks flushing. "But I felt it. There's something inside it, something heavy. And Jennifer, she's acting strange, like she's scared of it, but won't say why." Poirot's eyes gleamed. The intuition of youth is often clearer than the logic of age. "Let us see this racket, if you please." Julia unwrapped the sweater, revealing the racket's worn strings and scuffed frame. Poirot took it, his fingers probing the handle with a surgeon's precision. He tapped it, listening to the faint echo, then produced a small penknife from his pocket. With a deft twist, he pried open a seam in the grip, revealing a hollow compartment. Inside, Nestled in a scrap of velvet was a single emerald, its facets catching the light like a trapped star. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his moustache twitching. "A jewel of Ramat, no doubt. The fortune of a fallen prince, hidden in a schoolgirl's toy." Julia's breath caught. "Ramat, like Shasta's uncle." "Precisement," Poirot said, his voice low. The coup in Ramat was no mere political upheaval. There were whispers of a treasure smuggled out before the palace fell. "This emerald is but one piece, I suspect, and someone at knows its value, someone who will kill to claim it." Julia's mind raced. But who? The killers already taken to lives, and Shasta's gone. What if they come for me next? Poirot's gaze softened, but his tone was firm. "You have shown courage, mademoiselle, to come to me, but courage must be tempered with caution. Return to Meadowbank. Say nothing of this to anyone, not even your friend Jennifer. I will follow, and Hercule Poirot will bring order to this chaos." The return to Meadowbank was a haze of nerves and exhaustion. Julia slipped back through the gates just as dusk fell, the school's silhouette looming like a fortress under siege. She hid the racket under her bed, the emerald now tucked into a secret pocket in her blazer, a weight that felt both thrilling and terrifying. Poirot had promised to arrive the next day, but every creak of the floorboards made her jump, every shadow a potential threat. That night, Jennifer returned to the dormitory, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed. "Where were you all day?" she asked, her voice sharp. "The infirmary said you never showed up." Julia forced a smile, her heart hammering. Just needed some air. Feeling better now. Jennifer's gaze lingered, as if searching for a lie, then flicked to the bed, where the racket lay hidden. "Good," she said, but her voice was flat, and she turned away too quickly. As Julia lay in the dark, the emerald's presence burned against her skin. She thought of Poirot, his calm certainty, his promise to unravel the web of secrets. But the school felt like a trap now, its walls closing in, and somewhere in the maze of Meadowbank's corridors, a killer was watching, waiting for the next move in a deadly game. The next morning, the school buzzed with a new energy, a ripple of curiosity and fear. Word had spread that a detective was coming, a real detective, not like Inspector Kelsey's plodding constables. Julia stood by the dormitory window, watching the drive, when a sleek black car rolled through the gates. Hercule Poirot stepped out, his hat tilted at a precise angle, his cane tapping the gravel with purpose. His eyes scanned the school, and for a moment they met hers, a silent promise that the truth was within reach. But as he approached the main hall, a scream tore through the air, sharp and jagged. Julia's heart lurched. It came from the sports pavilion, the same place where Miss Springer had died, where Miss Van Sittert had fallen. She ran toward the sound, her feet pounding the grass, unaware that she was racing toward a revelation that would change everything. The pavilion was a tomb of shadows, its air thick with the scent of polished wood and old leather. Julia pushed through the door, her breath catching as she saw Miss Chadwick, the school's co-founder, crumpled on the floor, her face ashen. Miss Bulstrode knelt beside her, her hands shaking as she pressed a cloth to a gash on Miss Chadwick's temple. A sandbag lay discarded nearby, its weight a silent accusation. "Julia," Miss Bulstrode snapped, her voice cutting through the fog of panic. "Get help now." Julia turned to run, but Poirot was already there, his small frame filling the doorway with an authority that belied his size. "Stay, mademoiselle," he said, his eyes sweeping the scene. "The little grey cells must observe." He knelt beside Miss Chadwick, his fingers brushing her wrist. "She lives," he said, his voice steady, "but we must act swiftly. Mademoiselle Upjohn, tell me, did you see anyone near the pavilion?" Julia shook her head, her voice trembling. "No, but ... the scream. It was so loud." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "A scream to draw attention, perhaps a distraction. The killer is clever, but not cleverer than Hercule Poirot." As the school nurse arrived, followed by a grim Inspector Kelsey, Poirot stepped aside, his eyes never leaving the sandbag. Julia watched him, her mind racing. The emerald, the racket, the murders, all of it was connected, a puzzle she'd only begun to grasp. And now, with Poirot here, the pieces were starting to fall into place. But the danger was closer than ever, and Julia knew she was no longer just a witness, she was a target. The rest of the day passed in a blur of police interviews and hushed conversations. Miss Chadwick was taken to the infirmary, her condition stable but serious. Poirot moved through the school like a conductor, orchestrating questions with a precision that left the staff flustered. He spoke to Miss Bulstrode about Mrs. wartime connections, to Adam Goodman about the groundskeeper's late-night patrols, to Mademoiselle Blanche about her nervous habits. Each conversation was a thread, weaving a tapestry only Poirot could see. Julia kept her distance, the emerald a secret she guarded with every glance. She avoided Jennifer, whose questions had grown sharper, almost accusatory. By evening, the school felt like a pressure cooker, ready to burst. Julia sat in the library, pretending to read, when a note slipped under her book. The handwriting was jagged, the ink smudged. "Return what's mine, or your next dot." Her blood ran cold. She looked around, but the library was empty, the only sound the tick of a clock. She folded the note, tucking it into her pocket beside the emerald. Poirot needed to know, but she couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on her, waiting for her to make a mistake. As night fell, Julia lay awake, the racket hidden under her pillow, the emerald burning a hole in her thoughts. Poirot's arrival had changed the game, but the killer was still out there, and Julia was running out of time. She closed her eyes, picturing his moustache, his calm certainty. Tomorrow, she told herself, tomorrow Poirot would find the truth. But in the darkness a shadow moved, silent and swift, and the game was far from over. Chapter 8. Poirot's Inquiry. The morning sun spilled through the tall windows of Meadowbank School's great hall, casting long, dappled shadows across the polished oak floor. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax and old books, but beneath, the familiar comfort of the school's grandeur. lay a restless undercurrent. The murders of Miss Springer and Miss Van Sittart had left an indelible mark, and the arrival of Hercule Poirot, the diminutive detective with his immaculate moustache and piercing grey eyes, had set the entire institution ablaze with speculation. Students whispered in corners, their voices a soft hum like bees disturbed in their hive, while the staff moved with the stiff precision of those who knew they were being watched. Poirot stood at the center of the hall, his hands clasped behind his back, his head tilted slightly as he surveyed the room. His black patent leather shoes gleamed under the light, and his suit, tailored to perfection, seemed almost too pristine for the chaos that surrounded him. To the untrained eye, he might have appeared merely curious, a visitor taking in the sights. But to those who knew him or had heard the tales of his brilliance, his stillness was a storm gathering strength. Miss Bulstrode, the headmistress, stood beside him, her face a mask of composed authority. Her grey hair was swept into a tight bun, and her navy dress, though simple, carried the weight of her decades-long reign over Meadowbank. Yet even she could not entirely hide the strain in her eyes, the faint tightening of her lips as she spoke. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, her voice low but firm, "I trust you've settled in. The staff and students are understandably unsettled by recent events. Your presence has sparked both hope and apprehension." Poirot turned to her, his eyes twinkling, with a mixture of amusement and understanding. "Madame, it is always thus when Hercule Poirot arrives. The guilty, they squirm like the worm on the hook, while the innocent, they seek the light of truth. It is my task to separate one from the other. N'est-ce pas?" Miss Bulstrode allowed a small, wry smile. "Indeed, I've arranged for you to speak with the staff this morning. The students, I think, should be left to their lessons, for now routine is their anchor in this storm. Shall we begin?" "Mais oui," Poirot replied, inclining his head. "Let us commence with the interviews. The truth, it hides in the smallest of details, and I, Hercule Poirot, am a master of such details." The headmistress's study, where the interviews were to take place, was a room of quiet power. Bookshelves lined the walls, their spines worn, book meticulously ordered, and a large mahogany desk dominated the space, its surface clear save for a single silver inkstand and a leather-bound ledger. A window overlooked the school's manicured lawns, where girls in navy blazers moved in orderly lines toward their classrooms, their laughter muted by distance and dread. Poirot seated himself in a high-backed chair behind the desk, arranging his hand symmetrically before him. Miss Bulstrode stood by the door, ready to usher in the first interviewee. "I'll bring them in one by one," she said. "If you need anything, my secretary, Miss Shapland, is just outside." Poirot's eyes flickered at the mention of Miss Shapland, though his expression remained serene. "Mercy, madame. Let us begin with Mrs. Upjohn, I think. Her connection to the intelligence service intrigues me." Miss Bulstrode nodded and stepped out, returning moments later with Mrs. Upjohn, a woman whose presence seemed to fill the room despite her unassuming appearance. She was in her late 50s, with sharp blue eyes and a sensible tweed suit that spoke of practicality over vanity. Her daughter, Julia, was one of Meadowbank's students, and it was her wartime past that had drawn Poirot's attention. "Mrs. Upjohn," Poirot began, gesturing to the chair opposite him, "please be seated. I understand you have a history with the intelligence service." "Yes." Mrs. Upjohn sat, her posture straight but not rigid, her hands resting lightly in her lap. "That was a long time ago, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady but tinged with caution. "During the war, I worked in signals intelligence decoding, mostly. I left that life behind when Julia was born." Poirot leaned forward, playfully, his eyes fixed on hers. "And yet, madame, you recognized someone here at Meadowbank, did you not? A face from those days of secrets and shadows." Mrs. Upjohn's fingers tightened briefly on the armrest, though her expression did not waver. "You're well informed," she said dryly. "Yes, I saw someone at the start of term, during the parents' arrival day. It was a fleeting glimpse, but I'm certain it was her Eleanor Klein. Or at least, that was the name she used in 43. She was a courier for the resistance, but there were rumors she played both sides. I couldn't be sure it was her. She looked older, of course, and her hair was different. But the way she moved, that tilt of her head, it was unmistakable." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his mind at work. "And where did you see this woman, Madame Gu?" "In the crowd near the gates," Mrs. Upjohn replied. "She was watching the girls arrive, but she didn't approach anyone. I tried to follow her, but she vanished into the throngs. I haven't seen her since." Poirot made a small, precise note in the leather-bound notebook before him. "Most interesting," he murmured. "And you have told no one else of this sighting?" "No," Mrs. Upjohn said firmly. "I didn't want to stir up trouble without proof. But with these murders—" She hesitated, her eyes searching Poirot's face. "Do you think she's involved?" Poirot raised a hand, his fingers splaying elegantly. "It is too soon to say, madame. But rest assured, Hercule Poirot does not overlook such threads in but tapestry of crime. You have been most helpful." As Mrs. Upjohn rose to leave, Poirot's voice stopped her at the door. "One final question, if I may. Your daughter, Julia, she is observant?" "Yes." "Perhaps she has noticed something unusual among her peers." Mrs. Upjohn turned, a faint smile softening her features. "Julia's sharper than most, Monsieur Poirot. If there's something amiss, she'll have seen it. But she's also fiercely loyal to her friends, so you may need to coax it out of her." Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming. "Merci, madame. I shall keep that in mind." The next to enter was Mademoiselle Blanche, the French teacher, whose nervous energy seemed to ripple through the room like a breeze stirring leaves. She was a slight woman, with dark hair pinned loosely, and eyes that darted from Poirot to the window and back again. Her dress, a faded lavender chiffon, hung loosely on her frame, as though she had lost weight recently. "Mademoiselle Blanche," Poirot said, his tone warm but probing. "You have been at Meadowbank for how long?" 2 years, monsieur." she replied, her accent soft but precise. Her fingers twisted a handkerchief in her lap, the fabric fraying at the edges. "I teach French and literature. It is a quiet life, but rewarding." Poirot tilted his head, his gaze unwavering. "And yet, mademoiselle, you seem unsettled. Is it the murders that trouble you, or perhaps something else?" Mademoiselle Blanche's eyes widened, and for a moment she seemed on the verge of bolting. But she steadied herself, her voice trembling only slightly. "The murders, of course. Who would not be frightened? Miss Springer, Miss Van Sittart, it is terrible, none terrible." "Oui," Poirot agreed, his voice smooth as velvet. "But I wonder, mademoiselle, if you have seen anything out of the ordinary. Put a stranger on the grounds, perhaps, or a colleague behaving in a manner unexpected." Mademoiselle Blanche's handkerchief tore slightly under her grip, and she quickly tucked it into her sleeve. "No, monsieur, I keep to myself, mostly. I have seen nothing." Poirot's smile was gentle, but his eyes were like steel. "And yet, mademoiselle, I have heard that you were seen near the sports pavilion on the night Miss Springer was killed. A curious place for a teacher of literature, Nan." Her face paled, and her breath caught. I was taking a walk," she stammered. "The air in my room was stifling. I meant no harm." Poirot raised a hand, silencing her protests. "Calm yourself, mademoiselle. I do not accuse. I merely seek the truth. If you recall anything at all, will tell me, yes?" She nodded, her eyes brimming with unshed tears, and fled the room as soon as Poirot dismissed her. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled, his mind sifting through her words like a prospector panning for gold. The interviews continued through the morning, each staff member offering a piece of the puzzle, though none fit together. Yet Miss Rich, the quiet English teacher, spoke with a dreamy detachment, her answers vague but oddly poetic, as though she saw the world through a veil of her own making. Miss Chadwick, the school's co-founder, was fiercely protective of Meadowbank, her voice cracking with emotion as she spoke of its tarnished reputation. Anne Shapland, Miss Bulstrode's secretary, was poised and efficient, her answers clipped and precise. But Poirot noted the way her eyes flicked to the door whenever he mentioned Ramat. By noon, Poirot had spoken to nearly every staff member, but the truth remained elusive. He rose from the desk, stretching his arms with a small sigh, and stepped to the window. The lawns below were empty now, the students tucked away in their classrooms. But a flicker of movement caught his agile figure in a groundskeeper's cap, raking leaves near the pavilion. Adam Goodman, the so-called groundskeeper, whose charm and quick wit had already piqued Poirot's curiosity. "Most interesting," Poirot murmured to himself. "A man who is not what he seems, in a place where nothing is as it appears." He was about to turn away when a soft knock sounded at the door. Miss Bulstrode entered, her face grave. "Monsieur Poirot, I've just received word from Inspector Kelsey. They've found something in the pavilion photograph, torn in half, hidden beneath a loose floorboard. He thought you should see it." Poirot's eyes lit up, his moustache quivering with anticipation. A photograph, you say? Lead me to it, madame. The little grey cells, they hunger for such clues. The sports pavilion was a low, modern building, its whitewashed walls stark against the green of the playing fields. Inside, the air was cool and faintly musty, smelling of leather and linseed oil. Inspector Kelsey, a stocky man with a nonsense demeanour, stood near the lacrosse rack, holding a small evidence bag. Inside was a torn photograph, its edges ragged, depicting a sunlit balcony overlooking a marble courtyard. A figure stood in the foreground, their face obscured by the tear, but the setting was unmistakable. The Palace of Ramat. Found it this morning, Kelsey said, handing the bag to Poirot. One of my men was checking the floorboards. Uneven. This was wedged underneath, along with some dust and a bit of sand. Poirot held the photograph to the light, his eyes narrowing. Sand, you say? From Ramat, perhaps. And this balcony. It is a place of significance, I think. Tell me, Inspector, have you found the other half? Not yet, Kelsey admitted, scratching his chin. We're still searching. Could be anywhere by now burned, maybe, or hidden somewhere else. Poirot shook his head, his expression grave. None, Inspector. The other half is here, in this school. The killer. They do not destroy such things lightly. This photograph, it is a key to their motive, and they will not rest until it is whole. Again, Kelsey raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical, but he nodded. I'll have my men keep looking. Anything else you need? For now, none, Poirot replied, slipping the evidence bag into his pocket. But I would ask that you keep this discovery between us. The killer, they watch, and we must not tip our hand. As Kelsey left to resume his duties, Poirot lingered in the pavilion, his gaze sweeping the room. The lacrosse sticks, the neatly folded towels, the faint scuff marks on the floor all seemed ordinary, yet he knew they held secrets. He was about to leave when a soft creak sounded behind him. He turned, his hand instinctively reaching for his pocket. But it was only Miss Bulstrode, her face pale in the dim light. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I've just seen something odd. Mademoiselle Blanche was in the staff room, slipping a note under Miss Rich's door. She didn't see me, but she looked terrified, as though she feared for her life. Poirot's eyes gleamed, his mind racing. A note, you say? Most intriguing. Come, madame, let us see what secrets Mademoiselle Blanche hides. They found Mademoiselle Blanche in the staff room alone, her hands trembling as she sorted through a stack of essays. The room was small and cluttered, with mismatched chairs and a battered tea urn hissing in the corner. Miss Rich's door, a narrow panel at the far end, was closed, but a faint rustle of paper suggested someone was inside. Mademoiselle Blanche, Poirot said, his voice soft but commanding. A word, if you please. Pry. She froze, her eyes darting to the door, then back to Poirot. Monsieur, I am busy. The student's work will wait, Poirot interrupted, stepping closer. I have seen many things in my career, mademoiselle, and I know the look. For fear. You are afraid, yes. And this note you left for Miss Richet, is part of that fear, is it not?" Mademoiselle Blanche's face crumpled, and she sank into a chair, her hands covering her face. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," she whispered, "but something that night in the pavilion. I couldn't tell anyone I was afraid. They'd think I did it." Poirot knelt beside her, his voice gentle but insistent. "What did you see, mademoiselle? Tell me, and I will protect you." She hesitated, her breath hitching, then spoke in but a rush. "It was after midnight. I couldn't sleep, so I went for a walk. I saw a light in the pavilion, and I thought it was Miss Springer checking the equipment. But when I got closer, I saw 2 people. One was a woman, I think, but I couldn't see her face. She was arguing with someone, a man. Maybe I heard her say, 'The cat must not escape.' Then there was a shot, and I ran. I hid in the bushes until it was quiet, but I was too afraid to tell anyone." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind seizing on her words. "The cat, you say? Most curious. And this woman, did you recognize her voice?" Mademoiselle Blanche shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, monsieur. It was too dark, and I was too frightened. But I wrote to Miss Rich because I think she knows something. She's always watching, always listening. I thought she might help me." Poirot rose, his expression grave. "You have done well to tell me, mademoiselle. But you must say nothing of this to anyone else. The killer, they are close, and they will not hesitate to strike again." As he turned to leave, his gaze fell on Miss Rich's door. A faint shadow moved beneath it, as though someone had been listening. He exchanged a glance with Miss Bulstrode, who nodded imperceptibly. The web of secrets at Meadowbank was tightening, and Poirot knew the truth was within his grasp. If only he could untangle the threads before another life was lost. The afternoon passed in a blur of activity, with Poirot moving through the school, like a silent predator, his eyes missing nothing. He spoke with Julia Upjohn, whose sharp wit and quiet courage impressed him, coaxing from her a tale of Jennifer's strange behavior around her tennis racket. He observed Miss Chaplin, whose efficiency seemed almost too perfect, and Miss Rich, whose dreamy demeanor hid a mind as sharp as a blade. And always, in the back of his mind, was the torn photograph, its missing half a silent challenge. As dusk fell, Poirot returned to the pavilion, alone this time, his flashlight sweeping the floor. The scuff marks he had noticed earlier were faint, but deliberate, leading to a corner where the floorboards sagged slightly. He knelt, his fingers probing the wood, and with a soft click, a panel lifted, revealing a small, dust-covered space. Inside was a single object, a pearl earring, its luster dulled by time, but unmistakably fine. Poirot held it to the light, his heart quickening. "The cat," he murmured. "It begins to purr." He slipped the earring into his pocket, his mind poor light with possibilities. The earring, the photograph, the cryptic words overheard by Mademoiselle Blanche. They were pieces of a puzzle, and Hercule Poirot was determined to see it whole. But as he left the pavilion, a chill wind stirred the trees, and he felt the weight of unseen eyes upon him. The killer was watching, and the game was far from over. That night, as the school slept under a moonless sky, Poirot sat in his guest room, his notebook open before him. The earring lay on the table, its pearl glowing faintly in the lamplight. He traced the lines of his notes, his mind weaving together the threads of motive, opportunity, and deception. The cat, he knew, was the key-knot, a literal creature, but a code, a symbol, a secret that had cost 3 lives and threatened more as he closed his eyes. The words of Mademoiselle Blanche echoed in his mind. The cat must not escape. And in that moment, Hercule Poirot, the master of the little grey cells, knew that the truth was closer than ever and more dangerous than he had dared to imagine. Chapter 9. The third Blother air at Meadowbank School hung heavy with dread, as though the very walls whispered of the horrors they had witnessed. The summer term, once alive with the chatter of schoolgirls and the hum of ambition, had curdled into a nightmare. To murder's Miss Springer shot through the heart in the sports pavilion, and Miss Van Sittert, her skull shattered by a sandbag, had left the prestigious institution teetering on the brink of collapse. Parents, frantic with fear, had whisked their daughters away, leaving behind a skeletal staff and a handful of students, too stubborn or too entangled in the mystery to flee. Among them were Julia Upjohn, her sharp mind buzzing with the secret of the tennis racket's hidden jewels, and Jennifer Sutcliffe, whose nervous glances betrayed a fear she could not name. The morning sun did little to dispel the gloom as the school awoke to another day of uncertainty. In the staff room, Miss Bulstrode, the indomitable headmistress, stood by the window, her face etched with resolve. She had built Meadowbank from nothing, a beacon of learning and discipline, and now it threatened to crumble under the weight of scandal. Beside her, Miss Chadwick, her loyal co-founder, clutched a teacup, her hands trembling. The other teachers, Miss Rich, quiet and watchful. Mr. Forbes, the history master with his distracted air, and Mademoiselle Blanche, the French teacher whose nervous tics had grown more pronounced, sat in uneasy silence, their eyes darting to the door as though expecting the killer to stride in. Outside, the grounds were patrolled by Inspector Kelsey's men, their heavy boots crunching on the gravel paths. Yet their presence offered little comfort. The killer, whoever they were, moved like a phantom, striking with precision and vanishing into the shadows. And now a new figure had entered the fray, Hercule Poirot, the diminutive Belgian detective with his gleaming moustache and piercing grey eyes. His arrival the previous day had sent ripples through the school, his courteous questions cutting through the fog of fear like a blade. He was no stranger to death, and his presence promised answers, or at least the hope of them. Julia Upjohn sat in the library, her knees drawn up to her chest, a book on Elizabethan poetry open but unread on her lap. Her thoughts were elsewhere, fixed on the tennis racket she had swapped with Jennifer's, the hollowed-out handle, stuffed with glittering jewels from a far-off palace, was a secret too heavy for a schoolgirl to bear. She had told Poirot everything, her voice trembling as she recounted the murders and the racket's hidden treasure. He had listened with a stillness that unnerved her, his eyes never leaving her face, and promised to protect her. But protection felt like a fragile thing when death seemed to lurk in every corner. The library door creaked open, and Julia's heart leaped. It was only Jennifer, her face pale and her hair mussed, as though she had barely slept. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Julia said, forcing a smile. Jennifer sank into a chair, her fingers twisting the hem of her blazer. "I might as well have. Did you hear about Mademoiselle Blanche? She was acting so strange last night, slipping notes under doors like some kind of spy." Julia frowned. "Notes to whom? I don't know. I saw her near Miss Rich's room, but she scurried off when she spotted me. She's been jumpy ever since Poirot arrived, like she's afraid he'll sniff her out." Julia's mind raced. Mademoiselle Blanche, with her pinched face and darting eyes, had always seemed out of place at Meadowbank, her French accent slipping at odd moments. Poirot had noticed it too, his questions to her sharp and unrelenting. "Do you think she's involved?" Julia whispered. Jennifer shrugged, but her eyes were wide with fear. "I don't know what to think anymore. First Miss Springer, then Miss Vansittart, and now Shaster's gone, kidnapped right under our noses. What if I'm next?" Julia reached out, squeezing her friend's hand. "You're not next. Poirot, pure, and he's cleverer than anyone. He'll catch whoever's doing this." But Jennifer's gaze drifted to the window, where the sports pavilion loomed like a silent accusation. "I keep thinking about that racket," she murmured. "Why did I let you take it? If someone knows about the jewels—" "They don't," Julia said firmly, though her own doubts gnawed at her. "We'll be careful. And Poirot has a plan. I'm sure of it." Across the grounds, in the headmistress's study, Poirot sat opposite Miss Bulstrode, his hands folded neatly on his lap. The room was a study in contrasts. Her desk, cluttered with papers and photographs of past students, spoke of a life devoted to education, while Poirot's pristine appearance suggested a mind that abhorred disorder. Adam Goodman, the groundskeeper, who was no groundskeeper at all, leaned against the wall, his easy charm masking the tension in his jaw. He was a British agent, tasked with recovering the Ramet jewels, and his presence at Meadowbank was no coincidence. "Monsieur Poirot," Miss Bulstrode began, her voice steady despite the strain in her eyes, "I must know what you've uncovered. My school is falling apart, and I cannot protect my girls if I'm kept in the dark." Poirot inclined his head, his moustache twitching. "Madame, the little grey cells, they work tirelessly, but the puzzle is complex. 2 murders, a kidnapping, and a fortune in jewels hidden in a schoolgirl's racket. These are not random acts. There is a thread that binds them, and I am close to grasping it." Adam shifted, his eyes narrowing. "What about Mademoiselle Blanche? I've been watching her. She's been sneaking around at night, and I found a torn photograph in the pavilion Ramets. Palace clear as day." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The photograph, yes, it is significant. And Mademoiselle Blanche, she is not what she seemed. I have learned from Mrs. Upjohn, that remarkable woman, that she recognized a face at Meadowbank from her days in intelligence. A wartime agent, perhaps, hiding in plain sight. Miss Bulstrode's breath caught. "You mean to say one of my staff is a spy?" "It is possible," Poirot said carefully, "but we must tread softly. The killer is cunning, and they will not hesitate to strike again if they feel the net closing." A knock at the door interrupted them. Miss Chadwick entered, her face ashen. "Miss Bulstrode, it's Mademoiselle Blanche. She's dead." The room froze. Poirot rose, his movements deliberate, as though he had expected this news. "Where is she, Mademoiselle Chadwick?" "In her room," Miss Chadwick stammered. "I went to check on her. She hadn't come down for breakfast and I found her. Oh, it's horrible." The staff quarters were a labyrinth of narrow corridors, bent, creaking floorboards, a world apart from the polished halls of Meadowbank's main building. Mademoiselle Blanche's room was at the far end, its door ajar. Poirot stepped inside, his eyes sweeping the scene with clinical precision. The French teacher lay sprawled across her bed, her face frozen in a grimace of terror. A sandbag, stained with blood, rested beside her, and in her clenched hand was a passport. Its pages crumpled. Inspector Kelsey, summoned from the grounds, arrived moments later, his face grim. "Another one," he muttered, kneeling beside the body. "Same method as Miss Van Start. Whoever's doing this isn't slowing down." Poirot bent over the passport, his gloved fingers prying it from Mademoiselle Blanche's grip. He opened it, his eyes narrowing as he read. "Angle Blanche," he murmured. "But this is not her true name. The photograph, it is recent, but the document, it is forged." Adam, peering over his shoulder, whistled softly. A fake passport. So she was hiding something. More than something, Poirot said, his voice low. She was hiding herself. Mademoiselle Blanchot, rather. Angle was a woman with enemies. I suspect she was blackmailing the killer, using her knowledge to extract money or protection, and now she has paid the ultimate price. Miss Bulstrode, standing in the doorway, pressed a hand to her chest. Blackmail. But why? What did she know? Poirot turned, his gaze piercing. She knew the identity of the murderer, Madame. Or at least, she knew enough to be dangerous. The torn photograph, the notes slipped under doors. These were her attempts to leverage her secret. But the killer, they are ruthless. They do not negotiate. Inspector Kelsey straightened, his jaw tight. This is getting out of hand. 3 murders, and we're no closer to an arrest. Poirot, what's your next move? Poirot's eyes flickered to the window, where the sports pavilion stood in the distance, its silhouette a constant reminder of death. We must search her room, Inspector. Every letter, every scrap of paper. And we must protect the remaining students, especially Mademoiselle Julia. She is in grave danger. Julia, unaware of the latest tragedy, was in the dormitory, packing her belongings into a small suitcase. She had decided to leave Meadowbank, her courage faltering under the weight of fear. The jewels, now in Poirot's possession, were no longer her burden, but the killer's shadow still loomed. She glanced at Jennifer's empty bed, her friend having slipped out to the library earlier, and felt a pang of loneliness. A soft knock startled her. She opened the door to find Miss Rich, the quiet English teacher, her face pale but composed. "Julia, may I speak with you?" Julia hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, Miss Rich." The teacher stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "I've noticed you've been preoccupied. Is there something you'd like to share? About the murders, perhaps?" Julia's stomach twisted. Miss Rich's voice was gentle, but there was an edge to it, a probing quality that set her nerves on edge. "I don't know what you mean," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Miss Rich smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're a clever girl, Julia. You've seen things, haven't you? Things you haven't told anyone." Julia backed away, her hand brushing against the suitcase. I need to go. I'm late for class." Before Miss Rich could respond, the door burst open, and Adam Goodman stood there, his expression hard. "Miss Rich, Miss Bulstrode needs you in her office, now." Miss Rich's smile faltered, but she nodded and left without a word. Adam turned to Julia, his voice urgent. "You need to stay with me, Julia. It's not safe here." Julia's eyes widened. "What's happened?" Adam hesitated, then said, "Mademoiselle Blanche is dead, murdered, just like the others. Poirot thinks you're a target because of the jewels." Julia's knees buckled, and she sank onto the bed. "But I gave them to Poirot. I don't have them anymore." "The killer doesn't know that," Adam said grimly. "Come with me. We're moving you to a secure room until this is over." In Mademoiselle Blanche's room, Poirot and Inspector Kelsey sifted through her belongings, their movements methodical. The French teacher's life was laid bare, a collection of cheap novels, a few letters in French, and a locked diary hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Poirot pried it open, his fingers deft, and scanned the pages. "She writes of fear," he murmured, his eyes flicking over the cramped handwriting. "Fear of discovery, fear of a shadow watching her. And here, listen to this, Inspector. I saw her in Ramet on the balcony. She thinks I don't know, but I do. If she refuses to pay, I will tell all." Kelsey frowned. "Her, so the killer's a woman." "It would seem so," Poirot said, closing the diary. "But we must be cautious." Mademoiselle Blanche was a woman of secrets, and secrets are slippery things. This hurt could be a deception, a trap left for us to find. A constable appeared at the door, his face flushed. "Sir, we've found something in the pavilion. A glove, hidden behind the lacrosse nets. It's got blood on it." Poirot's eyes lit up. "A glove, you say? Take me to it at once." The sports pavilion was a tomb of shadows, its air thick with the scent of polished wood and leather. The glove, a woman's, lay on a table, its leather stained with dark, crusted blood. Poirot examined it, his gloved fingers tracing the stitching. "It is small," he said softly. "A delicate hand wore this. But the blood, it is fresh, no more than a day old." Kelsey's eyes narrowed. "Miss Van Sittert's murder, or Mademoiselle Blanche's," Poirot said. "We must test it, and we must question the staff again. Someone here is playing a deadly game, and they are growing desperate." As they left the pavilion, A scream pierced the air. Poirot and Kelsey broke into a run, their footsteps echoing across the grounds. The sound came from the staff quarters, where Miss Chadwick stood in the hallway, her hands pressed to her mouth. "It's Miss Rich," she gasped. "She's gone. Her room's empty, and there's blood on the floor." Poirot's heart raced, his mind already piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. Miss Rich, with her quiet demeanor and late-night wanderings, had been a question mark from the start. Was she the killer, fleeing before the net could close? Or was she another victim, her blood staining the floor as Mademoiselle Blanche's had stained the gloves? "Search the grounds," Poirot ordered, his voice sharp, "and bring Miss Bulstrode to me. We are running out of time." The school was a hive of activity as the police combed the grounds, their torches flashing in the gathering dusk. Julia, now under Adam's protection, sat in Miss Bulstrode's study, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Poirot stood before her, his expression grave. "Mademoiselle Julia," he said, "you are brave, but bravery alone is not enough. The killer is close, and they will strike again if we do not act swiftly. Tell me, have you seen anything at all that might help us?" Julia hesitated, then said, "Miss Rich. She came to my room earlier. She was asking questions, like she knew about the jewels, and she looked scared, but also angry. I don't know how to explain it." Poirot nodded, his eyes narrowing. "Miss Rich, yes, she is a piece of the puzzle, but I fear she is not the whole picture. And now, with her disappearance—" A knock at the door interrupted him. Inspector Kelsey entered, his face grim. "We've found Miss Rich. She's alive, but barely. She's in the woods, stabbed in the side. She's asking for you, Poirot." The woods behind Meadowbank were a tangle of brambles and shadows, the air thick with the scent of damp earth. Miss Rich lay propped against a tree, her face pale and streaked with blood. A constable held a torch, its light casting eerie shadows across her face. Poirot knelt beside her, his voice gentle but urgent. "Mademoiselle Rich, you must tell me what happened. Who did this to you?" Her eyes fluttered open, her breath ragged. I saw too much. The pavilion, the glove. It's her. She's been watching all along her." Poirot pressed, his heart pounding. "Who is she?" Miss Rich's lips parted, but no sound came. Her head lolled to the side, and her breath stilled. Poirot closed his eyes, his hands clenching into fists. Another life lost, another clue snatched away. Kelsey swore under his breath, "We're too late." But she said her, that narrows it down. Poirot rose, his face a mask of determination. "It narrows it, yes, but not enough. We must return to the school. The killer is still among us, and they will not rest until the jewels are theirs or until we stop them." Back at Meadowbank, the night closed in, the school's lights flickering like candles in a storm. Julia, now guarded by Adam and a constable, sat in the library, her mind racing. The jewels, the murders, the glove, Miss Rich's dying words. It was all connected, but the pattern eluded her. She thought of Poirot, his calm certainty, and clung to the hope that he would unravel the truth in the staff room. Poirot gathered the remaining staff: Miss Bulstrode, Miss Chadwick, Mr. Forbes, and Anne Shapland, the secretary whose cool efficiency had begun to crack under the strain. He stood before them, his eyes sweeping over their faces, searching for the flicker of guilt. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice low and commanding, "we are at a crossroads. 3 women are dead, and a 4th clings to life. The killer is here, in this room or just beyond it. They seek a fortune in jewels, but their greed has made them careless. I warn you now, the net is closing, and there is no escape." Miss Chadwick gasped, her hands trembling. Anne Shapland's eyes narrowed, her pen pausing over her notebook. Mr. Forbes blinked, his glasses slipping down his nose. Miss Bulstrode met Poirot's gaze, her jaw set. The silence was broken by a crash from the hallway. Poirot spun, his hand on the door. "Stay here," he ordered, and stepped into the darkness outside. The grounds were alive with movement. Police torches shouted orders, the rustle of leaves. Poirot's heart raced as he followed the sound, his mind racing. The killer was desperate, their plan unraveling, and somewhere in the shadows the truth waited to be revealed. The chapter closed with a single, chilling sound, a woman's scream, sharp and fleeting, swallowed by the night.